So welcome everybody to the FSA's December board meeting, and delighted to be here in the town hall in Reading. Welcome to our new board members, Alison Austin and Sue Patterson, who are both here at their first board meeting. Alison joined the board just in the middle of last month when we said goodbye to Mark Rolfe and Margaret Gilmore. Sue's actually been a member since the beginning of September, but prior commitments meant she was unable to attend our September meeting in Belfast, but she's been participating in all of our other board discussions. This will also be our Director of UK and International Affairs, Anjali Juneja's last board meeting before she takes up a new position with DEFRA in the new year, and I'll say a bit more on that shortly. We've received 7 questions from members of the public in advance of this meeting, and as usual, we will potentially address those during the course of the discussions, but we will, of course, provide a written response later. Those relate primarily to precautionary allergen labelling, the meat charging discount, the National Food Crime Unit, and then 2 questions relating to some governance issues in the FSA. All of the questions have been published on our website, and board members have all had the opportunity to consider them in advance of today's meeting. Before we get started, I do want to note that after the close of today's board meeting in public, the board will meet in a closed session to discuss a paper on the implications of the SPS, the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement, for some of our work. This is all part of the EU reset, which the government's negotiating. The decision to hold that session in private is not a decision that I've taken lightly. We pride ourselves on doing our discussions and holding our meetings in public. And I should say that I absolutely intend to make the paper that supports those discussions public in the new year. But given the sensitivity of negotiations at this point, I trust that you'll understand the need for that to remain private today. So on now to the regular business of the meeting, and can I just start by asking if any board members have any external interest to declare, which are not already obviously on their register? And are there any items on the agenda today where people have an existing conflict of interest that they want to declare? Tim.
There could be a perception that I have a conflict of interest, or at least an interest, in the meat charging item because we're a livestock producer, although we rarely use abattoirs, but I should mention it.
Thank you. Sue.
I have a daughter with a nut allergy.
Thank you. Okay, so if we turn now to the actions, oh no, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's do the minutes from the last meeting, and are board members content to accept these minutes as an accurate record of our last meeting? Very good, thank you. So turning now to the actions arising from those from that meeting. You've got the list in the papers. There are a few actions which are still open and perhaps warrant a little bit more explanation. So on action 2, which was the consultation on CBD, that consultation only closed at the end of last month. And since Food Standards Scotland have not yet issued their consultation, I agreed with the team that we would hold that item over to a later date. I do want to say that this delay does mean that we will not be in a position to put advice to ministers until later than we'd envisaged in the new year. But we'll obviously keep people updated, and particularly the stakeholders in this area, as much as we can. And I think that timing will become clearer when Food Standards Scotland have issued their consultation. On action 4, after discussions with the team, I decided that this really warranted a more detailed discussion. And so this is on the sampling strategy and our science update. I think it needs a more detailed discussion, and also one when I hope we'll have a new CSA in post. So we're going to have an item on this at the January retreat when the board can discuss it in a bit more detail. And then the only other action which is outstanding is action 1, which was the update on the foodborne disease epidemiology group. I'm not quite sure what is holding that up, but maybe Rebecca can comment.
Yeah, that's being finalised now, Susan, so that will be with you very shortly. As we discussed, I think, at the last board, it's been more difficult than expected to understand exactly what's behind some of the rise in the foodborne disease rates that we've seen in our annual reporting. So we've needed to go back and discuss with colleagues across government and with our colleagues in CERD as well to really make sure that we've left no stone unturned. So that update will be with you very soon, and then we're due to bring a paper, as we've discussed, to the March board, where we'll be setting out the plan for how we're going to tackle this.
Okay, so Rebecca, can I make sure that we will have that, at least the update before our January retreat, please?
Yes, absolutely. When I say finalised now, I do mean that, yeah.
Okay, any other comments on any of the other matters arising? Or anything people want more information on? Okay, if not, we will press on to my report, which is really an opportunity for me to bring you up to date on what's been happening over the last few months. And I think what I'd start by saying, it's been a really busy period for our cross-government engagement. And I think that recognises an enormous number of different pieces of work that are going on across government. I'm really pleased the FSA has been really well embedded in many of these conversations relating to the SPS agreement, regulatory reform, school food standards, and indeed the food strategy. SPS and the EU reset is the most important issue for the FSA right now, and I was pleased to attend the first 2 meetings of the Europe Implementation Group, which is the ministerial group chaired by the Cabinet Office Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds on SPS implementation. We're working incredibly closely with DEFRA on this because there's obviously a huge amount of joint interest. DEFRA held an initial webinar for businesses recently, and they will step up that engagement in the new year to enable people to prepare. It's incredibly important that every food business understands the implications of the common understanding on dynamic alignment. This will affect everybody, not just businesses that trade with the EU. So in addition to supporting the engagement by DEFRA and the Cabinet Office, the FSA will also be running its own bespoke sessions for industry stakeholders, especially in relation to regulated products. Those will be starting next week, but they will continue into the new year. Moving on from SPS, I had a really good introductory meeting with Minister Eagle following her appointment as the DEFRA Food Security and Rural Affairs Minister. It was a very productive first conversation, and I'm really looking forward to working with her, both on key areas of FSA business, such as the meat charging discount regime that we're going to discuss today, but also on the food strategy. Talking of DEFRA ministers, I also met with Baroness Heyman to discuss our collaboration on data and intelligence sharing, including the public health risks posed by illegal imports. That's a topic which will come up in the NFCU annual report. I was also, in relation to Baroness Heyman's work, I was really pleased to see the budget announcement that the government's committed to consulting on potential reforms to the Veterinary Surgeons Act, which the FSA very strongly supports. And I'm really grateful to Baroness Heyman for really pushing ahead with this. I've also had a number of other meetings which are in my list of engagements. I'll just note that I was particularly pleased to join a recent MP roundtable together with Junior Johnson, our Director of Operations, which was convened by Sarah Dyke MP to discuss the future of the small abattoir sector. It was a great opportunity to hear MPs' concerns and ideas as our proposals are being developed on the meat charging discount regime. But it was also a chance to really hear from them about the importance they attach to having small abattoirs in their area. And indeed, I was pleased that one of our officials was able to join John Milne MP on a visit to an abattoir very close to his constituency just last week. I think otherwise, it's probably fair to say that conversations with stakeholders outside government have been dominated by the potential impacts and implications of the SPS agreement, but also by the work of our innovation hub. I attended the launch of the Market Authorisation Innovation Service at Imperial College a couple of months ago, I think, or maybe it was over the summer. No, it must have been this autumn. And it was a real pleasure to welcome Lord Vallance to that meeting. I'd like to really thank him and the officials in his department for the support they've been providing to the FSA for this really exciting initiative. So this work, together with the opening of our authorisation service for precision-bred food and feed last month, I think are really good examples of how the FSA can support innovation whilst also keeping food safe by giving greater clarity on the regulatory requirements and the authorisation timelines. And that's important both to the innovators themselves, but also to the investors in this area. Following on that theme a little bit, yesterday some of the board were able to join me on a visit to RSSL at Reading, on the Reading University campus, who, through the Novel Foods Expert Forum, are really focusing on advancing innovation and regulatory science in the novel food sector. This visit really helped, I think, to boost the board's understanding and knowledge of this fast-moving area. And we were really impressed to see the fantastic analytical capabilities that they have there, which I know is used very widely by food businesses. Moving on from engagements and onto people, I mentioned that this is Angelique's last board meeting, and in fact, she'll be leaving the FSA at the end of this week. I really wanted to thank her for all she's contributed to the FSA. Angelique was promoted to be Director of UK and International Affairs, I think about 3 years ago. And I don't think we envisaged then just quite how important that role would become. You've all seen and heard Angelique in our conversations about borders and trade, especially the Windsor Framework, but of course more recently on SPS. But she has done so much more than this, not least in our leadership of the offices in Wales and Northern Ireland. And I can see big smiles and nods from Brian and Anthony. Angelique's been brilliant at connecting us to others across government and has been a driving force within the FSA, so she will be greatly missed, but we wish you well at DEFRA. On the positive side, one of Angelique's great strengths has been to build a fantastic team, and I have great confidence in their ability to continue to lead the FSA through the SPS negotiations and to sustain our international engagement until a new director's appointed. And I should say that that advert is out already, and I think the interviews will be early in the new year. Now, it's not often I get to make announcements, but in other people news, I am absolutely delighted to be able to announce that we have appointed our new Chief Scientific Advisor. I'm very much feeling the absence of a reassuring presence by me here today. And so our new CSA for the FSA will be Professor Ian Young from Queen's University, Belfast, and we expect that Ian will join us early in the new year. Some of you will already know Ian from his role as chair of the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition. And other people, Anthony probably in particular, Frank too, will know Ian from his current position as the Chief Scientific Advisor to the Department of Health in Northern Ireland. Ian will step down from both of those roles when he joins us, but as you can imagine, that experience means he's going to bring a wealth of knowledge, expertise, and already established networks to the FSA. He is a clinician, he's a scientist, and he's done a lot of work with policymakers. So I feel really confident that Ian will provide the board with the assurance and confidence that we need in FSA science, and also give us some really solid advice as we consider policy options. I think it's a great appointment, and really looking forward to Ian joining us. So just finally, at the end of the year, one always tends to sort of reflect on what's happened. And this, of course, has been the 25th anniversary year for the FSA. And it's been really good to have a moment to think back on all that's been achieved during this time. There's been some great stories from people within the FSA reflecting on their memories of some of those milestone achievements, things like FHRS or the implementation of Natasha's Law, for example. Brexit too, of course, which was a big matter for us. What also strikes me is that looking ahead, it feels as though we're at quite an important juncture for the FSA, given the likely changes in our role, which will arise from an SPS agreement, and indeed some of the other new programmes of work which are on the horizon that we'll touch on later. I'm going to leave Katie to sort of say more, but I do want to say I really welcome the announcement in the budget statement that the government has asked the FSA to develop proposals for a new system of food regulation in England. And that will enable us to develop a much more intelligence and data-led approach to conducting food hygiene and standards checks, with the absolute intention of improving public health, food safety, and delivering better outcomes for the public. So this feels like it's been a sort of Christmas bumper edition, but very happy to take any comments or questions. I'm going to suggest we hold over any questions on future food regulation until Katie's given her report, because I think she'll probably add a little bit more about that announcement. But if there's anything else people wanted me to elaborate on, very, very happy to do that. There we go. Right, one day I'll get a question. Katie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Susan. Good morning, everyone. I think I've got another Christmas bumper edition. I was in the luxurious position of cutting stuff out of my Chief Exec's update because I just couldn't fit in all the wonderful news. So that was probably an indication of how busy it is at the moment. There's obviously plenty in my written update, and I'm very happy to take questions on any of it, but a few things I particularly wanted to draw out. Susan has already mentioned the SPS agreement, and that is a huge priority for the FSA. I wanted to particularly draw the board's attention to what I've said in the update about the approach we are taking to work that might create divergence, which I think is in line with the discussions we've had with the board so far, but I really wanted to put it in record on my update, and I've had questions, including from the FSA Select Committee, about how we're approaching this. So I'd be grateful if the board could be comfortable with that. Also on the SPS agreement, the other thing to draw out is I think we have quite a big financial and resourcing risk in this respect. We've not got more money to do the work on the agreement, which will be very substantial. We're negotiating, working with industry on implementation and trying to do legislation effectively all at the same time. And we are going to have to absorb that within a flat cash settlement. Now that means I think I'm going to have to take more financial risk than I might usually do as accounting officer. We are going to need to recruit roles now that we absolutely need to do this work, in the hope that we can find a way to absorb them next year. And I will be keeping the board very closely informed on that. We are speaking to the Treasury about the risk that presents to us, but we absolutely have to do the work. So we will obviously try and be as sensible as we can and absorb as much as we can, but we'll need to keep coming back to this. On the budget announcements, as Susan said, we had a very significant announcement for us in the budget on the future of food regulation, the government announced that they are asking the FSA to look at to develop proposals for a consistent national approach in England for regulating large food businesses. And this is a brilliant opportunity for us. This one does come with some funding, which is excellent, and it really builds on work we've been doing for the last few years. We're at an early stage, we've just had the request, but I thought it might be worth saying a little bit about how we think we need to approach this. And we have already started talking to stakeholders across the system who we've been working with, and the board members who were here last year or earlier this year remember we've done an awful lot of engagement over the last year on what the future of food regulation should look like. First of all, we are very conscious that our guiding star on this must be protecting public health. Our job is to protect public health, to protect the interests of consumers. We also have a duty to think about how we can support and promote economic growth, which we will do as we go through the work. But any changes to the system we make must be in service of that protection of public health. It's also very clear to us that we need to look at the whole assurance system and not just at national level regulation of the big businesses. We've had many discussions at this board about the challenges of local authority regulation for local authorities in resourcing terms. Local authorities do an incredibly important job for the vast majority of food businesses in the country who are local small businesses, and they provide a huge amount of support, guidance to those businesses. And that system is critical. It needs to endure, and we need to make sure that we support and improve that, as well as thinking of new ways of regulating for some of the biggest businesses. We are also very clear, I think, that there needs to be, continue to be independent regulation of all businesses. When we've talked about this in the past, when we've talked about national level regulation, and I've heard a lot of concern from people about just looking at data, trusting businesses. In our trial, we had checks alongside that on the ground. I think we're very clear that there always need to be checks, and they always need to be done by an independent regulator. And the final point very much on our minds is that resourcing problem for local authorities is not improving. And whatever we do, it may enable local authorities to direct some of the resources they have more effectively, but it should not be an excuse to diminish the resources of local authorities. And we need to be really careful as we go through this work that we don't do anything that could make that system worse. So I think those are the things that are on our mind as we're going through it. I'm very happy to talk about it in more detail. We are obviously very committed to working with partners across the system on it. We don't yet know at what pace we will need to work. That might be dictated by whether there's any opportunity for legislation, but we need to be ready to go quickly if there is. I'm afraid I still have a few more things to draw out in the bumper update. As you'll see from the update, the wider regulation for growth agenda is still extremely active. There's a lot going on, a lot of interest from government in this area. In fact, I've been invited along with, I think, 17 other regulators to a new Regulators Council that the Department for Business and Trade is setting up in the new year. So I'm really pleased that in my update to the board, I'm able to say that we've delivered more of our commitments in the Regulation Action Plan. We have done the first audits for recycled plastic, which we committed to do, set up a new system this year, and now we have that working, which is enabling businesses to export to the EU with recycled plastic food contact materials. And also we've published the first waves of guidance from the cell-cultivated products sandbox. Those were both commitments. So we're meeting all our commitments in the Regulation for Growth Action Plan. Beyond that, I think the biggest things that we can do to support growth are to do the SPS agreement really well, to secure a good agreement and to work with businesses on implementing it well. To do the work I've just discussed on future of food regulation, and to do as much as we can on the innovation front. And those are, I think, our guiding areas for growth as we look forward. I've said there's a lot going on. I think it's worth noting in my update, I mentioned I gave evidence to the EFRA committee on the work of the FSA. I think it was in October. It already feels like a long time ago. I think that's the first time in over 5 years we've been asked to do an evidence session specifically on our work. And actually, in the last month or two, we've been asked to give evidence to 3 different parliamentary committees. So I'm going to the House of Lords Regulators and Industry Committee in January as part of a panel. And we were asked to give evidence to the Health and Social Care Committee, which we discussed and decided with the committee it was best to do in the form of written evidence. But I think that just illustrates the level of interest in the things that are going on that affect the FSA at the moment, and the level of complexity. So it just gives you a sense of how much is happening. And then finally from me, I don't think I could finish without adding on behalf of the executive our thanks to Anjali. I won't do a big speech here. We've done our speeches with her, but she knows how much we will miss her. And also welcoming Ian, who has joined us as a new member of EMT, Ian Gibson. It's his first board meeting, so welcome to Ian.
Thank you, Katie and Ian. I should have noticed that already, but I think you should take it as a compliment that I didn't think of this as your first board meeting because you've arrived and settled in so swiftly. But yeah, great to have you with us. So there is, as Katie said, a huge amount there. Just briefly on the EFRA committee, I know board members, we sent details, the link round for that previously. But if anyone else is listening to this conversation today and wants to know more and understand more about our work, particularly in relation to borders and trade, then I really would encourage you to take a look at that. Katie was there with Jeff Ogle, the Chief Executive from Food Standards Scotland, and I think together really demonstrated the really valuable work both organisations are doing, but also the close collaboration that we do have with FSS. Obviously, great to hear that we're meeting all the commitments on the Regulation for Growth agenda. That's an item that we discuss regularly and in more detail at the Business Committee, but I think it is important for the rest of the board to note that we're doing that. And yeah, well, a massive other things, Katie, thank you for everything. There's a lot of there's always a lot going on in the FSA, but there's often a lot of relatively sort of modest things. At the moment, we've got the usual collection of relatively modest things, and then we've got quite a collection of really substantive issues. I think you're doing a great job at holding it all together. Can I suggest, given that this announcement, the request for the FSA to develop this new system for future food regulation is such an important item, and will add in, I mean, as Katie said, it is funded, but it will add in a significant piece of work and complex piece of work for the FSA. Could I suggest that I take questions or comments on that item first, and then we'll open up to wider matters? I think the first thing that I would say is it was an announcement for England only. We are talking to the other nations, and I think that it would certainly be, my ambition that where possible we should try to do this on a UK-wide basis, recognising that businesses tell us all the time that they operate on a UK-wide basis and would prefer that. Scotland has some reform processes underway of its own already, but we'll be talking to them and seeing where we can align. Let me open up to others and then see what the mood is. Steve.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome the announcement from the budget as well. I think that's really important to look at the future of food regulation as a whole. I think it is an opportunity to both improve outcomes and the system as a whole. It does need to work better. It does need to be more sustainable, I think. So very warmly welcome that. It's going to be crucial as we go forward about how we engage and work with delivery partners. So I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how that process might be managed or what the plans are to engage with partners in that food regulatory environment. Thank you.
Great. Let's just gather up some other comments on this, Sue.
So we had obviously had the opportunity to go and look at some of the local authority work over the last couple of days, and I just wanted to say what fantastic people what they are, how hard they work, and we recognise how under-resourced they are. So I think it's really important going forward that we continue to work with them and we continue to support them.
I'd just reiterate what Susan's just said, but in the sense of we were out with Slough Council yesterday and the colleagues on the ground all were welcoming that reform as well, and particularly how do we, I think, both connect to the people on the ground in small units, but also then with big retailer manufacturers, but particularly how can we address data and make sure that however it is reformed, it is really addressing all of the way that the food industry is changing today, because actually it's not what it was previously.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I mean, so what I'm sensing is general warmth and, you know, and sort of agreement that this is definitely something we should pursue. We have discussed it a lot in the past. I think one of the things I really welcomed that you said, Katie, was that this needs to be a really quite broad piece of work, and I think Louise's comments that this needs to work for small and large, I think is incredibly important. Most recently, we have been focusing on the large retailers, and with the enterprise level regulation pilot, that's clearly one of the components of it. But I do think it's important that we embed that in a wider thing. I think the other thing we learnt during that pilot, and I think I'm hearing again from Sue and Louise, is the importance of combining that data with the checks on the ground. You know, there will always be some things that need to be checked on the ground, and perhaps even more importantly, the support on the ground that we know that the environmental health officers give. So I think we need to make sure that we find a system which gets the best out of both. And I think that also speaks to my final point, is that this anything we do has to be about delivering better outcomes, and absolutely must not erode the work that local authorities are doing on the ground. You know, the support they provide to businesses, particularly the smaller enterprises, is, you know, arguably one of the most important components in keeping food safe. So let's make sure we hang on to that. Katie and I, as you would expect, discussed this a little bit previously as to how we were going to take this forward. It is a huge piece of work, and we need to do it quite quickly. So what I am suggesting is that we should convene a subgroup of the board to provide a little bit of additional both oversight and challenge as this work develops, certainly over the next few months until the work plan is clear. So I think we should take that as a specific action for us to convene that group to work with Beth, Rachel, and others who are leading on this. And so I guess on the back of that, well, I'll be talking to board members about that later, but also any thoughts you have about the elements we need to consider in that would be good. Katie, do you want to just respond as well? I should have let you do that before I tried to jump in.
It's really helpful to have those steers, and also helpful that I think they're very much in keeping with our thinking.
Yeah.
I was just going to pick up the point about engagement, where I can't yet say much about how we're going to engage because it's such early days, but it's going to be absolutely critical that we do this with regulatory partners, with industry, with others who are going to have a stake in it. So we know we need a really good engagement plan. We've already reconvened. We had a senior steering forum, which was helping us work out the next steps following our trial of national level regulation. we already reconvened that once the announcement happened to start discussions, and I think we'll want to broaden that out and to put in place some really good mechanisms for engagement there.
Thank you. So, putting that to one side for the time being, let me open this paper up to wider questions or comments, not just on the elements that Katie highlighted in her oral update, but anything else that's in that paper. Rhian.
Thank you. It was just a comment at the start of the report about the SPS and resource for that. And I suppose, you know, just to sort of say it is disappointing that we haven't been given any extra funding to support the work. It is such an important piece of work that you're going to have to put a lot of people toward. So I suppose just saying, you know, very supportive of you. You mentioned taking risk, because we have to do it, and we have to do it really well. You know, this is a generational opportunity. So just, I know we'll come back to it at many discussions, but just supporting, taking some risk in your staffing plans to get it done right. You know, essentially just to keep the consumer safe. That's the bottom line, isn't it?
Thank you. It was just on your note about regulation for growth. And I'm conscious that you're going to give evidence to the House of Lords, obviously in January, but whilst we're all in favour of trying to develop growth and push growth forward, I'm just wondering, it's sort of cart and horses here, because until SPS is agreed, are we really in a position to take that issue further in terms of, do we really know what regulation is going to look like post an SPS?
Well, is there anything else on SPS comments that people have? Fiona, and then I'll ask Katie to respond to those.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, I just wanted to add, as soon as we're able, and I know that we're not driving this bus, the importance of getting out clear communication for business, because they've been through the mill coming out of Brexit and entering all of the new processes with a lot of stop-start. Again, not all within our hands, but as soon as we can get some clear guidelines out or build clear processes, that would be really, really appreciated, I think, and very important.
Any more SPS comments? Okay, Katie, do you want to?
Certainly. Well, first of all, yes, absolutely on clear guidance to businesses, and we're working with partners across government. Obviously, we're not in control of the timetable, and we need to fit into a wider government effort, but we certainly want to be able to go out with as much as we can say to industry as quickly as possible to help businesses prepare, and also to help inform us as we do our work on it. On Anthony's point about regulation for growth, I think this is really important. I find myself constantly saying to people seem to have this conception that regulation and growth are in tension. And actually everything I hear from my discussions with the food industry is that proportionate and stable and good regulation on food safety and standards is an absolute prerequisite for growth. And I find myself constantly going out and saying this, and saying the best thing that we can do actually to support growth is to do our job well. Because if we fail at that, if there is a food safety incident, if there's a loss of trust in food, that is absolutely disastrous for the economy as well as for potentially for public health. So I think what I would like to do is try and move us away from a discussion about, you know, what new thing can you do to support growth in little initiatives, into let's do our job really well with business. Let's do the SPS agreement really, really well with business, and that will support growth. And if there are things we can do on top of that, working with the industry that would actually have a real impact, I think it's worth exploring them when we can with the resource we can. But those are the critical things from my perspective. And I might just ask Ian, on the point about resourcing, to say a little bit about where we're at with the Treasury on this, because I think it gives some important context to that risk.
Yeah. Just before Ian comes in, I really appreciate you saying that, Katie, and I know absolutely that that is where the board sits. that. Indeed, I have a regular meeting with the chairs of other safety regulators, and I think we speak with a common voice on this. And what we all think is important is it's about certainty and stability in what the regulations are. Of course, that they're proportionate and all of the other things, but it's really good to hear you articulate that so firmly. Ian, on to the money.
So where we are with the Treasury, and as Katie has said, we're in an ongoing conversation with the Treasury about this, is they acknowledge that the costs of SPS are significant for the organisation. We will put a case to them in the new year showing what the net additional costs of delivering SPS will be. We'll lay that case out transparently and faithfully to them, and we'll then get into a conversation about how we manage that. And in the interim, as Katie has said, we'll have to take a degree of managed risk to ensure that we can deliver the SPS deal. So we're very focused on it.
Thank you. So we've done future food regulation, we've done SPS. Back to the more regular items. And is there anything else in Katie's report people wanted to pick up on? No? Gosh, all very comprehensive. Great. Thank you, Katie. Thank you really to all of our exec team and basically everybody in the FSA. People are working incredibly hard. And the good thing is I think there's a real energy in the organisation. There's a real sort of drive to do things and a sense of opportunity that we can make a very positive difference for the future, which is really fantastic. So we'll move on now to the main papers for discussion today, and we're going to start with the evaluation of the meat charging discount regime. Pleased to welcome back to the board James Cooper. We've heard from James a number of times as we've worked through this over the last year. I think the last time we discussed this was at the June board meeting, where we agreed that there was a real economic rationale to try to level the regulatory costs or the regulatory burden, as some might see it, which does fall disproportionately on the smaller businesses. And that principle has subsequently been supported by ministers. So I know that James and his team have been putting their heads together to try to work out how best to do this, talking to stakeholders, working with our economists, and that's resulted in the proposals that we see in the paper today. So, James, I think the best thing is for me to hand over to you to walk us through them, and then, as usual, we'll open up to questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. So following on from your discussions in June, we've been working to create a model for a revised discount scheme that meets the steers that we were given. As Susan said, that we've carried out significant stakeholder engagement as part of this, including face-to-face meetings in Cardiff, Belfast and London with our key stakeholders. It's fair to say there's a prevailing view amongst the stakeholders that we shouldn't be reducing support, understandably. However, no evidence has been presented to justify the continuation of support to the largest businesses, either during our earlier rounds, our call for evidence, or this most recent round of stakeholder engagement. So within that context and taking account some of the practical difficulties around it, the model that we propose today is generally being accepted as the best available way to meet the board's steers and the rationale and objectives that the board asked for. So what it creates is a model that's simpler for business. They have one rate for all the hours that they use, so it's simpler to understand. The smallest businesses will get the maximum support. Then as we move from the smaller to the medium-sized businesses, there's a taper in the system so that there's no cliff edge, so that if one of those smaller businesses looks to grow their business, they're not suddenly faced with, if I have one or two extra animals going through my system, I suddenly lose all my discount. That's not how it works. There's a gradual taper to ensure that we are supporting that growth. But that taper does go down to zero for the largest businesses, where the economies of scale that exist in the current system can be realised by those businesses. So we're seeking board agreement to a number of the different key components within that model, particularly focused on how far we extend that support into the sort of the smaller to medium-sized enterprises with where we place the end of that taper. We've continued to recognise that the situation in Northern Ireland has its differences, and we propose this is managed by Northern Ireland ministers exercising the discretion that's built into the model, should they see fit to do so. In the June board, you asked us to look at a number of additional elements, such as linking support with compliance. Our recommendation following discussions with stakeholders and further analysis is that we don't pursue those at this point, but we do potentially keep it as an open question for future enhancements to a revised system, but we should move to getting the simplified system in place initially as the key change. The board also asked us to ensure that next year, the 26-27 discount, which will follow the current methodology of giving the discount, as far as possible aligns with the new rationale for giving the discount, so provides as much support as possible to those smaller businesses. And we intend to do that. We're then introducing the revised system in 27-28, and then phasing that introduction over a couple of years so that by the end of the spending review period, the system's fully in place in 29-30. Delivering all this will require us to do a public consultation in spring 2026, and then having analysed and published those responses, come back to the board in early autumn and ultimately ministers for a decision on the final approach. And we're seeking board agreement to the various parameters in the paper and that timetable for consultation.
Great, James, thank you very much. I do appreciate the thought that's gone into this, and I'm actually very, very pleased to see these proposals for a revised scheme, which I think do meet, most of what the board asked for. I also have to say I completely understand that all businesses would prefer to continue receiving a discount on the cost of regulation. That is entirely understandable. But we were minded to stop that support for the largest businesses when we discussed this last time. And I don't think we've heard any new evidence that would suggest that we should reverse that decision. So I really don't want to reopen that conversation today. What I do want to do is to focus on the proposals for how we might support the small or smaller, as you call them, abattoirs. And so there are matters of the definitions, and perhaps most importantly, this issue of tapering, because the point that we don't want to stop successful small businesses becoming successful slightly bigger businesses, and this is back to our commitments to growth. That would be is an obvious example of where we could do something that was unhelpful. So I encourage board members to keep that very, very firmly in mind as we discuss this. I'm just going to open this up with there are also very specific points that we need to ultimately agree, but I think let's just start by thinking about the general principles that are in here. Have we got this about right now? And then we'll hone in a little bit more into the thresholds. Frank.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I welcome the paper. I was really impressed by the economic analysis and thought that had gone into it. Thank you for that, James, and to the team. To me, it seems to strike the right balance in terms of, allowing growth. As the Chair has said, it's really important we do that, but also shifting the resource and targeting it much more towards small, medium businesses. So I really welcome that. But my only question really was around the concept of discretionary support and how that would be used and why that is in there, and to make sure that it's not going to kind of take a lot of staff time to administer that, because potentially if it was used frequently, it could really consume quite a lot of resources. So if you could just expand a little bit on the discretionary support, James, would be helpful. Thank you.
Great, James. I'm just going to gather up a few questions and I'll come back to you, Claire.
Thank you, James. Very thorough paper. Whilst I do understand the importance of setting a baseline for businesses based on throughput, and that the taper could be used to not prohibit growth, on the flip side of this, How could businesses apply to rebase their throughput average if they were to lose a significant amount of business? And would that then move them back into eligibility of the discount? And then secondly, I do appreciate the need for flexibility of the taper as you described in the paper, but how do we also give certainty to businesses around the level of movement that's likely to happen on that taper year on year? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great paper, James, thank you. We discussed it at WFAC last week and you came to present, which helped us understand the Welsh context, which we were really happy with. I suppose the lingering comments from that discussion, probably not dissimilar to the general UK context, which is, so 2 points really. The first is, have we thought through, or can you elaborate a little bit on the smaller medium-sized abattoirs? We're really getting into the detail now, but you know, have we worked through any consequences for them, where because they'll sit at the top end of this taper, past threshold 1, but still at that kind of far end. So just a bit more on that, really. And then I suppose, not dissimilar to your point, a bit about can we imagine this driving any kind of business behaviours to stay at a certain point? There'll be sweet spots where the discount is worth maintaining a business plan which doesn't necessarily favour continued growth, you know, until you get, you know, there'll be a point then where growth is, you know, you move past and the discount is not material. So just any thoughts you've got on that? Thank you.
Fiona. Yeah, thank you, Susan. And thank you, James. I mean, it's a great paper. I found the threshold 2 tapering piece slightly challenging, because I think that there's this, that there needs to be clarity around what the regulatory burden means. It means the discount. And I think just for clarity of understanding, it's quite important to be explicit about that when we go out with communications on this. I also was unclear as to what was actually going to happen next year in 26-27. So what is the introduction of the process going to look like for businesses? So it would be helpful to understand what that means. And I think the other thing is really understanding how to manage this growth piece, because the small, when you actually average out the numbers in livestock units, it's about 19 beasts per week. I did do the poultry figures as well, but it's not a lot of throughput. So it means that once those businesses are starting to manage growth or volatility in their throughput, that could actually affect where this taper process impacts on their business. And I think it's really important for businesses to understand that, and that we're really clear, and to be able to explain how and whether, and actually that's a question, this system might actually be simpler than the one that we have at the moment.
Louise.
Thank you, James. It was a really good paper, and it's been nice to see how it's developed. My question is similar to Fiona in the sense of how do we, as the implementation happens, how do we be really clear for businesses so that they can budget, and be really clear at what point in a year will we say where businesses are on that taper and therefore what their impact of cost will be? I think we need to be really clear and set a point in time perhaps as to when that happens, so that gives businesses a sufficient time to budget for any change in impact.
Thank you. I had similar queries around timing and implications, so I won't repeat those. But specifically in 3.21, we're talking about how the tapers could change annually. I just I'd like to understand that a little bit more, and whether that was related to just the budget variation which you refer to, or whether that would also be impacted by things like RPI and CPI and things like that. So clarity on those future changes would be helpful.
Thank you. A few things to say, so please do bear with me. I declared an interest earlier I hope that interest actually gives me an insight which will be useful. I guess here one of the things is around trying to understand what we're trying to achieve over a longer time. And this gives a period of grace, I think, certainly for those smaller businesses. One point I did want to make was that growth may not necessarily be in the expansion of a single business, but the fact that we're enabling the opportunity for other small businesses to come about. Now, that actually slightly exacerbates the issue in terms of how do we get cover, because the question for small abattoirs isn't solely around the economics intrinsic to those businesses, but the economics of how we deliver that regulation and the difficulties that are certainly constrained a little bit by the legislation. So when we're looking at specific proposals, I would hope that we're able to think about what happens on the ground with those businesses and actually whether we're engendering that multiples of new businesses to be encouraged over time, because there are welfare and other community benefits to these sorts of businesses. So I'd hope that we can actually look at the thresholds in a way that does, if you like, allow an equitable approach to the regulation between smaller and larger businesses. And thinking about how we're looking at funding beyond T2 as well, because we actually have to have a system, I think, that endures over time. So some of those issues that I mentioned around the logistics and the practicalities will need to be addressed. And I suppose that's my enduring point here, that whatever we agree today, and I hope it is to the benefit of those smaller businesses, and that we are pragmatic around how we look at T1 and T2, that actually we also pledge to look forward into the future about how we manage this so that we actually get a settlement that makes sense, both from regulation and growth, but also looking after those businesses.
Thanks very much, colleagues. So I think, James, I can see you jotting down the questions, but it seems to me that there are a lot of points around certainty for business, and are we going to be sort of changing this all the time? So I think it would be good to hear more about that. And that perhaps also includes the transition arrangements. What are you envisaging? It would be helpful to understand that a little bit more. There's obviously lots of comments about the taper. I think it's probably important to remember we have a tapered system already in our discount, and you know that there are always going to be questions about slope and always going to be questions about where that ends. But nonetheless, it would be useful to hear some more of your thinking around that. I can't understand my own notes now. I guess in the taper there was Claire's point about what about businesses, you know, who might get smaller, and I suppose that links into the point. I presume it'll be once a year. There's some decision about what, but maybe you can expand on that. And then the practical implementations, the logistics, and how's this actually going to play out on the ground, I think was some of the things that I'm hearing.
Okay, so I'll try and answer all those, and please forgive me if I do miss a point. I'm going to group things together just for ease. I think it's probably worth saying that we've tried to keep flexibility in the model, but this isn't actually that dynamic a sector. So we want to ensure that we're not being a barrier to growth, but it's not that we're seeing lots of new businesses popping up and lots of change year to year. So things like the discretionary support and the ability to flex the taper within budgets are there to enable either businesses or ourselves to manage those kind of uncertainties, but we're not expecting massive changes year on year. It's actually a very stable sector in that kind of sense. In terms of the understanding for businesses, this system is much simpler than the current one, where we've got 6 bands and everybody gets a chunk of that band depending how far they're going. Essentially, one rate will be calculated for all hours on an annual basis. That rate will be based on the previous 3 years' average throughput. So if a business grows a bit, it will benefit from not suddenly making a change in discount. Equally, if it shrinks a bit, it will move back in. So we've thought very much about trying to keep this smooth for businesses, give them as much notice as possible of any changes, and keep it as stable as possible. Because the idea is that they can budget on it, they can know what they're going to get going forwards.
James, sorry, just to interrupt there. So are you saying that the charges for the discount for next year will be based on the last 3 years?
So under the new system, yes, the discount position, whatever their throughput is on average over the previous 3 years, that will be essentially where we draw the line up and go, in that case, you're eligible for this discount for the next year.
Okay, that's helpful
that's
to know.
how it will move forward. So that in itself, because we're looking at rolling 3-year averages, obviously there's practical issues around new businesses and not having 3 years data, but we'll finesse those. But that smooths the approach. For ourselves, we also need to smooth our budgets, and that's why I want to be able to adjust the T2 position slightly if we need to. In order to ensure that we bid on a 3-4 year spending review cycle, we can estimate budgets within that, but because we're giving business a commitment to a certain percentage of the costs back, we might need to vary that, and so it's ensuring that we've got the flexibility within that as well. But again, the way that is set up, moving the second threshold will have the biggest impact furthest away from the smallest businesses, so it will again maximise the certainty for those smaller businesses, and it'll just be at the edges where we'll have to have conversations around it. In terms of the impact on those smaller to medium-sized businesses, the current system gives a 90% discount in Band 1, and then it drops to 75% for Band 2, and that's quite a step drop. Actually, we expect, if we agree to put the threshold where it's proposed, that actually covers all of Band 1 and some of Band 2. So we'll end up with more businesses getting maximum discount than currently. And then the taper down from that will be a smoother process as we move into those more medium-sized businesses. So yes, overall, the industry will feel some places will lose money, but some businesses at smaller end where we actually are looking to put the support will benefit more from this system than they do currently. In terms of not being as Tim's point about the sort of the future and the long term encouraging businesses, we are giving a discount on a cost. So we are not able to support growth. We're stopping ourselves being a barrier to it. And I think that's quite important. We're not giving extra money to businesses. All we can do is say, we recognise we're a cost burden. We recognise at the smaller end that's disproportionate. And so we're correcting for that. For those smaller businesses. So there will still be a cost for entry, there will still be the challenges of that, but we won't be a new barrier on top of that is the goal with this. So the idea is to give a sort of stable long-term proposition with the caveat that ultimately we do need to maintain ministerial agreement to this approach. We need to at each budgetary cycle say, is this something you wish to continue supporting, so we get the budget to do it, and if ministers decide that they don't, then we'll have to look at that in that context. But assuming we continue the ministerial support and get the budget, then it's designed as a long-term stable approach. In terms of next year, we do still maintain the banding system, but budgets are tight, as we've already said. So we think we're probably going to have to do more of what we did last year and reduce the support in the upper bands quite significantly. And next year we've got a meeting with industry stakeholders next week where we're going to discuss with them exactly how we might do it and get their views on the best way to do that to match the budgetary constraints we have. And that will inevitably start a transition for particularly the larger businesses because they will see a reduction in the discount they're getting now that will transition into the new system.
Thanks, James. And we did agree when we last discussed this that although we didn't want to bring in a new system, precipitously, and therefore that would be delayed, we did ask you at the time to make that transition over this year and next year. So I think your proposal to make the biggest impact in the largest businesses is absolutely the right thing to do there. I think Anthony wanted to come in.
I'm quite happy if James wants to finish those questions. I want to come with very Northern Ireland specific approach. So
okay, James, I think that was the.
I think I'd covered everything.
Yes.
If I haven't, please do.
We've talked about the discretionary support, although that might lead into Anthony's comment, and maybe we could say a little bit more about that. But yes, I think we've covered those off. So Anthony.
Okay, forgive me, but you will recognise the paper does identified, Northern Ireland has a very different position in terms of the approach. Number of points that's worth making is that Northern Ireland ministers do have discretion, and I can guarantee 100% they will use that discretion. However, in Northern Ireland terms, this will be classed as a cross-departmental responsibility, and therefore more than one minister will be involved, and that makes it an executive decision. So we don't have a great history of getting executive decisions made, not easily and not quickly, so I would encourage early engagement with Northern Ireland ministers as quickly as we can. There is a theoretical possibility that people will move livestock either into the Republic or into Scotland to go for the cheapest deals. I say it's theoretical because I think the cost of transportation and animal welfare will prohibit that, so I don't think it's really a big issue. But actually, most of our plants, in fact all of our plants, are large plants, but they're very hard to staff, and most of the staffing comes from outside of Northern Ireland. Those people are mobile, and if those plants come into difficulty, we will find ourselves in some difficulties with people to operate the plants. The other point is that whilst the plants are large plants, they deal with multi-species, and therefore they tend to be more like several small abattoirs under one roof. So there is a very different makeup. My thanks to James for not just a very good paper, but for coming along to NIFAC, actually explaining it, going through it. He knows our concerns, our worries. But just on a personal basis, I think we should try and avoid divergence as much as possible. And I'd like to see whatever we achieve in Northern Ireland being reflective of the rest of the system so that we keep standardisation as much as we can. But it is a very good paper and it is the right way forward.
Thanks, Anthony. Really good to hear that perspective. As I think you know, we have been in quite close contact with ministers as in Northern Ireland as we've been developing this, so they're aware of the direction of travel. And obviously following this meeting and any decisions we make here, we'll be communicating those to their offices. And are always happy to have a conversation. So what I'm going to take, looking at the actions that we need to take from today's meeting, I think what I'm hearing very strongly is broad support for the recommendations for the general design of the model. I just want to focus now on specifically on the thresholds. Dare I say, I think the lower threshold, T1, is kind of an obvious place. It's a legal definition, and I'm seeing lots of nods, so I think we should just accept that one. T2 clearly is a judgment call as to where that's placed. And, you know, the economics of this and the number of businesses affected is really quite complex. Yeah. I don't know if anybody wants to make an opening bid as to where that's set. Okay, I'm going to let Katie have a go, unusually, but since it does involve money.
I think on T2, from an accounting officer point of view, my advice would be that it's really important to have the flexibility to set T2 in whatever place is appropriate, depending on the circumstances over time. If we set a fixed T2 now, that does really quite significantly constrain our ability to manage our budget, because it will commit us to quite a lot of spend ahead of time, and potentially in future SR periods where we have no idea what settlement we can get. I do get the importance of giving businesses as much certainty as possible, but in fact every year we have to set our charge rates with businesses, so they do not have certainty year on year as to how much they're going to have to pay anyway, because it will depend on the cost of providing the service. So we have to have that conversation the previous year each time. And in that context, I think we don't gain that much in terms of certainty for businesses by trying to set a set T2 threshold. So my advice would be to retain the flexibility.
Anthony.
Sorry, just with my Iraq hat on, can I concur with what Katie is saying? The other point is the cost of actually delivering the services is increasing year on year as the budget is getting smaller year on year. And I think that T2 flexibility is vital. Now, discretion is always a problem because people then say you've changed this year to that year, but I think it is important that we maintain that going forward for the services that are out there, but also for the financial protection of the organisation.
Tim.
Well, I agree with both those points. Perhaps from a slightly different perspective, because I think the discretion also allows us to make reasonable judgments that take in wider economic considerations. So we might argue that X amount of money might cover a very small number of extra abattoirs, but that actually might have much more far-reaching consequences if those small number of abattoirs were to go out of business as a consequence of the regulation. However, I wouldn't want us to be constrained and fixed in that. I want to make us decisions on a case-by-case basis, and also acknowledging our need to represent public money sensibly. I think that discretion will allow that, so I'd be supportive.
Oh, so it sounds like there's general acceptance around the Tier 2 threshold as well. Fiona, you're looking anxious.
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of clarity we probably need to have coming out of the process going forward, because I think that equalising the regulatory burden for businesses is different from balancing the FSA's books. And I know that they're all wrapped up in the same thing, but I think there has to be a process that's very clear and explicit as to how that former bit is actually going to be set out.
In the past, there has always been this sort of annual charging setting, and I'm assuming it would be at that point that the Tier 2 point would be set. James, maybe it's worth you just telling us a little bit more about how you envisage this, because it's all very well as agreeing in principle to this flexibility, but what I don't want is the board to have to think about this every year. I want to be sure that we have the board has set enough principles to allow officials to then implement it. And I'm not sure I know what those principles are.
So absolutely, there will have to be an annual charge setting process because we are not touching that side of the equation at the moment. And this will just be an element of that sort of work out where T2 should sit. I think it's worth saying there are, from discussions with stakeholders, some practical parameters that actually constrain how far you might want to move T2. Essentially, the further away you move from T1, the more generous you're being in terms of the wider support. If you get too generous, what you end up with is the smaller abattoirs actually getting more support than can be achieved just through economic efficiency with the very large ones. So you don't want to go so far that you're adding additional benefit compared to others, because the stakeholders are very clear that fairness is important. So that gives a sort of furthest you might want to go to the right kind of boundary to it, so that you don't end up in that kind of situation, other than in a transition year when you're sort of moving to the end point. Equally, we do want to be able to support growth and equalise the regulatory burden. So if you were to just have no T2 and just have without the taper, you end up with quite a step suddenly at the end of that point. So there's a sensible set of bounds in which it would sit that we can look at with the balancing the level of money available, the level of support we wish to give, and sort of set that on an annual basis. And the idea would be to keep it as stable as possible, because we don't want to keep changing it year on year, because that gives uncertainty to business. But there is, it's not an infinite choice. There's a sensible bounds within which to choose to put it on that annual basis.
Thanks, James. I'm very conscious that there's a number of people, well, some people have joined us in the room today, but there's certainly a lot of people online who may have a particular, dare I say, sort of vested interest in this area, will be wanting to really understand what this means. So what we're absolutely saying is that the 90% discount for the smallest businesses will be maintained, and indeed more people will benefit from that than have done previously, and people who are in that arena will know, because that's based on their number of animals. So that bit I think is clear. the very, very largest businesses will also have heard that we are unfortunately not able to continue support for them. But it'll be the people who are in the larger of the small that are probably wondering where they lie. Is there anything that you're able to say today that in a way sets the sort of, range? I mean, without prejudice to where the final thing lands, I'm just wondering, to help people listening, give them a sense of whether they're going to be in tier 2 or not. Is that possible or not?
So based on the analysis we've done so far, and my economic colleagues have done a sterling job with the data they've got, we've still got some research out there, so there will be a full impact assessment aligned with the consultation, but based on preliminary data. That point I was saying about there comes a point where you get diminishing returns and you end up actually over supporting people. Taking the example of the red meat sector, that's somewhere in the 7,000 to 10,000 LSU space. Equally, the idea of the minimum to support growth, thinking about the nature of the businesses we're talking about in that sub 1,000 category. They are businesses that will probably only have one line going. They are businesses that may be operating 2-3 days a week. And so the easiest method of growth there would be to double their size and add another line, or to, go 5 days a week compared to what they're doing. So a 2 to 3 time increase in their throughput would be the first step on the growth journey. And so as a minimum, you'd want to be supporting that. So it's in that boundary of 3,000 to 10,000-ish. Pick a number in the middle as a starting point. We'll do the more detailed economic analysis to do that.
That's helpful. I don't want to pin you down to something, but I hope, for stakeholders that is useful. And you also, important to say that there will be a consultation on this in the new year, and that will be the opportunity for people to provide evidence which will help us to refine whatever the proposition is. And I just, at this point say evidence really is important. We are trying to do this in an objective way. So this isn't a decision. We're talking about the principles here, not the exact execution of that. But that will be there'll be a constant. So are we thinking of that going out in January?
It'll be later in the spring, because we've got to get the research in first to make sure we can do the impact assessment. I think it's worth saying that the evidence on which those boundaries I just talked about was based absolutely came from the stakeholder discussions. So it's based on what they see as growth looking like at one end of the scale, and that fairness idea that they don't want to be over-subsidising compared to those that don't have access to the support at the other end of the scale.
Lovely. Thank you. And I think there are a number of other items. One, we've talked a little bit about the approach in Northern Ireland, and I think the message there is let's keep it as close to the rest of the England and Wales as possible, whilst retaining some discretion for ministers to act as they see fit. And I will continue conversations in Northern Ireland on that. We've noted that the transition will is somewhat underway already, will continue in next year before the new model comes in the year after. The one point we haven't touched on is the idea of additional elements. So at the last board meeting, we had a discussion where we were all quite enthusiastic about the idea that there could be some sort of measures of quality, or reward or disincentive, however you want to think about it, on measures of the quality of performance. And I note that the paper essentially concludes that would maybe not quite be unworkable, but that will be difficult to implement and introduce an element of subjectivity. In the cold light of day, I certainly accept that argument, and I think having a totally objective system, and we should manage quality in other ways through our enforcement activity. But I just do want to check with other board members that you're persuaded by that argument as well. I think there's a general agreement to that. Tim.
I certainly agree with that for where we are now, but I think as we're looking more broadly across how we regulate food for the future, then there are opportunities for thinking about principles from that wider exercise to think how that could work within a more pay for quality approach about how we regulate. So I wouldn't want it completely excluded, but certainly I recognise the pragmatism of what we're doing now.
Thank you. And that may be something when you're putting the consultation together that we might ask stakeholders for their views on, and any suggestions about how we might consider that in the future would be helpful. Okay, if there are no further comments, thank you very much to everybody who's worked on this. Lots of our economists have been beavering away behind the scenes, and I can't say how important that has been. Also really want to thank stakeholders. I know these are uncomfortable conversations, and I'm grateful to them for their engagement and providing us with the evidence that's helped us. I do think we are moving towards a system which is right for the public. I think it makes the best use of public money, and it removes barriers to growth through the sort of regulatory costs for very small businesses. So I actually feel pretty pleased with these proposals, but look forward to the consultation, hearing the views of stakeholders in writing, and also very much welcoming their help in finessing some of these details of how the model works, so that we get the implementation right. So I think the next action really is for you just to get the consultation out, but I'm imagining that this will come back to the board, at least as a note. After that, I mean, we're almost at the, well, we need the consultation, we need to go to ministers, so there'll be some update to the board after that, but I think we are largely beyond decision making, and the consultation is mostly about implementation issues. Rebecca.
Yeah, just setting aside the reform and the discussion we've just had for a moment, I'm conscious that we have had a question to the board on this item from Peter Hewson, Veterinary Director of AIMS. I think we've obviously covered the sort of reform points. We'll continue to engage with them and other stakeholders as we bring this proposal forward. And you know, they've been a very active and engaged stakeholder for us, and we work very closely with them. Just the last point that is made there is I think more about the way in which the detail of how we apply the system and the experience of businesses in how we set the charges and how transparent it is for them. And we will continue to, as we always do each year, think about how we can apply continuous improvement so that we can be as transparent as possible and make sure that the nuts and bolts are working as well as they can. So, that's something we know that we want to continue working on.
Okay, thank you. Right, thanks very much. Thank you, James. Thanks to everybody for your input, not just today, but over the last year as we've been really trying to work through this, which hasn't been easy. And we'll reward ourselves with a short break. So for those people who are watching online, we'll be back in 15 or 20 minutes, so around about 10:35. Thank you. So welcome back, and apologies to those people watching online that we're a few minutes late. We're moving on now to discuss the paper on the Codex proposals on precautionary allergen labelling. Before we get into this paper, I just want to remind the board of the tragic consequences that can arise from poor allergen management. Benedict Blythe died in December 2021 after accidental exposure to milk at school. We have just had the Prevention of Future Deaths report, I think it was published last week. There are no specific recommendations in there for the FSA, but nonetheless, these reports are an absolute reminder to everybody in the system about the responsibilities that we have to people with food hypersensitivities. And, I really recognise that we need to maintain all of our efforts to do better in this area. So I know that Rebecca has met with Benedict's mother to discuss some of the things that she thinks need to happen in the system. And I think it is important that we continue to put the needs of people with food hypersensitivities and their families front and centre in our conversations. And I just encourage people to bear that in mind when we have the rest of this discussion. So, as I said, today we're revisiting the Codex proposals on precautionary allergen labelling. This is just one component in our approach to allergen management. And when the board discussed this in, I think, September last year, it's quite a while ago actually, there was broad agreement and support for the idea of standardisation, but there was some concern about the use of thresholds as a part of that, and particularly the precise level that was being proposed, that of the so-called EDO5, the eliciting dose, as opposed to EDO1. We asked the policy team to go away and to gather further evidence from scientists, from the food industry, and from people with food hypersensitivities. And this paper sets out the conclusions from that work. So today, I'm really looking to us to agree the board's views on this matter. In the end, this Codex decisions are matters for ministers, but I know that they will be looking to the FSA for our advice. And so the considerations and the discussion today is incredibly important. So, James, welcome back. You obviously have a broad team. So from meat charging, now please take us into allergen labelling.
Thank you. So it's worth recapping that precautionary allergen labelling, PAL, is a risk communication tool. And it's about the risk of the unintentional presence of allergens once a comprehensive risk management process has been taken. So businesses should be doing everything they can to avoid there being any allergen contamination. This is a tool, should that still be a risk, about how we communicate that. The benefit of standardisation in this space is that it creates a firm basis that if we can communicate it well and therefore help people understand exactly what it means, it allows people to make their own risk judgment against a more certain basis and therefore avoid serious harm from the foods that they've got a sensitivity to. As set out in the paper, we've re-examined the evidence, including the latest scientific work, in order to understand and articulate the risks around thresholds and using a standardised threshold approach. We've then worked with both charities and business representatives to understand how these risks are viewed and what the implications of those in the real world are in this space. We're not proposing to make any changes domestically at this time, but we have concluded on the basis of the further examination of the evidence that we should support the work Codex are doing to standardise the approach internationally, and this is our recommendation to the board.
Thank you, James. I think I found this really, really helpful. It seems clear to me that the question that we have to answer today is one actually of judgment. The science doesn't give us a specific answer to this question. Patently, EDO1 is theoretically safer than EDO5, but I was interested to see that there is an absence of evidence that there are risks associated with the EDO5 level. The fact that it's a matter of judgment makes this discussion particularly important because we need to weigh up the views of all of the people that we need to represent. And so I thought it was extremely helpful to have the two round tables with the charities and also with businesses. And I was very pleased that they were on days when I was physically in the office and I was able to join them. There's mention of these in the paper, but I thought it might be helpful just for me to, I guess, put a personal view. Normally, I try to listen to the views of the board and then sum up. But I'll be honest, I think that those roundtables have been very formative in my thinking about this. The allergy charities were unanimously and strongly in favour of supporting the Codex proposals, assuming that the gluten issue is addressed. That's mentioned in the paper, but that's taken as read because I think everybody within Codex understands that needs to be sorted. So they were otherwise universally supportive, including of the EDO5 level. When I really pressed them on that, they considered that people with the most extreme sensitivities simply were not confident in PAL labelling and would not be confident with EDO1, and that they already took many other steps to keep themselves and their families safe, and they would continue doing that, even though that meant they had to rely on a very restricted range of trusted foods. They also believed, they also, I think assumed maybe is a better word, they were assuming that adopting EDO5 would reduce the use of PAL labelling, and they perceived that as an advantage. I mention that specifically because when it got to the industry roundtable, they had a slightly wider range of views, though in general and on balance, they did support these proposals. The point that they wanted to emphasise is that in the UK, most businesses, certainly the large businesses, are already working to much tighter limits, and they had no plan to change. So any worry that we might have that somehow this would encourage standards to slip in the UK, they were very keen to tell me simply would not be the case. They do not want to be involved in an allergen incident. They well know that this can lead to tragic consequences. The principal advantage that businesses identified if we were to move to this standardised approach was that it would improve the communication of allergen information through the supply chain. So that the bigger businesses, who I have to say were overrepresented in that group, felt that it would make it much easier for them to demand this information and to a particular standard. So the consequence of that is they actually said they didn't know what would happen to the, if you like, the prevalence of PAL labelling, because although some unnecessary ones might be removed, because they now had better information flow through the system, it was possible that PAL labelling might increase. But they were at pains to point out that even if it did increase, it would increase because it was necessary and it was important. So they really put the emphasis on accuracy of PAL rather than just the occurrence of it. So I think overall, I was left thinking that the impact of these proposals on the occurrence of PAL is also unknown, and we shouldn't make judgments based on that. But that standardisation was broadly supported by both groups, particularly strongly by the allergy charities. And what everybody agreed with is that standardisation was helpful. And again, the consumer groups felt that it would be easier to communicate and would give consumers more confidence if they felt there was a standard. Even if they didn't wholly understand what that was, the fact that there was a standard would boost confidence in the system. So I personally was very persuaded by that evidence, and my previous reservations, which were quite I had significant reservations when we last discussed it, I think have been assuaged, and I personally feel quite comfortable with these proposals. But I am keen to hear about other people's views, and I'm particularly keen to hear dissenting views because, as I say, I recognise that that's been a shift in my own position. Anthony.
I'm afraid it won't be a dissenting view. We had a very good discussion at this at NIFAC. I think where they were coming from was the fact that a lot of the components that make up final products that actually go to consumer pass through a lot of businesses and a lot of processes, and they welcomed the standardisation of going through that. They thought that it helped manage risk and effectively take out some of the critical issues that are within the supply chains going forward. There was two issues specifically to Northern Ireland that they did want me to bring up. One was the fact that we have responsibility for labelling within Northern Ireland, and therefore what impact will that have on the guidance, etc., that we'll put out there. And the second one was that in Northern Ireland, at Key Stage 3, which is 11 to 14, as part of the curriculum, we actually teach students to read labelling and understand it going forward. And again, would that mean we'd have to provide more guidance into the system? But overall, everybody was very supportive of this approach because some standardisation is better than none.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you, James. And it was really good to see the response from the charities and particularly, Susan, your take on that, because I did find that really reassuring. And particularly around consumers that have really serious allergies, just would still use their own risk assessment process. I do think it's helpful for industry around standardisation, and I can see that really helping, particularly further down the supply chain. I do think when we communicate this, we do need to ensure that where measurement below EDO5 is available, that I guess industry and consumers understand that risk assessments will still be done on the lowest available amount. And I was just interested to understand how long the gluten issue will take to be resolved, whether that's something we've got any further insight on.
Frank.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So no dissent from me either, I'm afraid, but if that's what you're looking for. But just as an aside, you know, we had a visit yesterday to Dove's Food Limited, and I was really impressed with the efforts that they take. This is a flour mill, and the efforts that they take to avoid cross-contamination, because obviously the PAL is important, but there are there are other important steps to prevent the terrible consequences that you described at the start. I'm also supportive of EDO5. I took great comfort actually in the fact, you know, that stated in the paper that below EDO8 there were no serious adverse events, you know, serious effects, including of course death, you know, so it was really reassuring to see that. And you know, generally, I think it's good to hear that the stakeholder groups were in favour of standardisation, which I think we should be in favour of. I guess this will align us as well with the EU. Is that correct, James? But I did wonder about alignment with other countries, particularly US, Canada, whether there might be, whether they take the same view or a different view, and whether they support the Codex or not. But I'm supportive of EDO5. Thank you.
So Codex, if it's adopted, would be an international standard. We're at the moment talking about what the UK position might be in that, so we don't know how everybody else ultimately will decide. Although I think what I've heard from officials so far is that we previously were a bit of an outlier in expressing reservations. In general, there seems to be broad support. At least that's my understanding. Rhian and then Sue. Yeah, I'm going to go around everybody. I'm keen to hear the full set of views.
Thank you. No dissent from myself either, but maybe just to add in. So, Susan, you mentioned about the round table with industry being perhaps the large manufacturers. So, when we had the discussion at WFAC about this, thanks, James, for that. It was really good discussion that we had. Because we've got the food centres in Wales, we have Helen on the board, on the committee who works in 0 to 5. She is able to give us that perspective from the smaller manufacturers, representing their views. And firstly, there was an absolute call for standardisation. So even from those organisations that perhaps don't have as much bandwidth, but it's hard not to speculate about implementation, and I know we are not there yet, but there was a discussion about actually in practice, how does this work? And the smaller manufacturers are not clear about how one would go about testing for EDO5. And I wonder whether separate, perhaps from the main board forum, we can pull together a bit of a briefing about what the testing methodologies are right now. So we can get a bit cited on it. I can take that back into Wales and talk about it a bit, because what we don't want is for any sense from business that there is a mountain to climb in terms of methodologies and new ways of working, unless that is the case. So yeah, a perspective there, but no, they were very supportive of standardisation.
Thank you. Sue.
So having sat in intensive care with my daughter having a nut allergy reaction, it's terrifying, and I can only have sympathy with people who have children or partners or who suffer from it. And I have to say, when I originally read the paper, I didn't think EDO5 went far enough. But I have to say, having read the reports from the working groups that were at FSA, it has given me a huge amount of assurance. And so I have to say, like yourself, I've changed my mind. I think probably the EDO5 is probably about right because it gives us that assurance. There's not going to be any severe reactions. But what I would like to see as well on the back of this is I'd love to see Owen's Law progressed as well, so that allergy sufferers can eat out and have the assurance that when they're looking at their menus, they know what allergens are there as well. So I think that's the last piece of the jigsaw that we really need to have in place as well.
Thank you, and that's a good point, that PAL is really about the manufactured, packaged food, and there's a whole separate, and indeed most of the incidents that we see occur in the out-of-home setting rather than with pre-packed food. So I think that point is well made. Let me start, Sue, and then sorry, Sue. Why am I looking over there? Steve, get my S's in.
Thanks. I'm not going to dissent either. I think the paper was really helpful in setting out in a balanced way the various sort of assessments that we need to make. I think the issue is without standardisation, we're left with a situation of consumer confusion, little real impact, and unnecessarily restricted choice. I think with a standardised approach, you gain clarity, consistency, a more effective tool, and likely greater choice as well. I think consumer education, though, will be crucial in actually helping communicate the messages about what it actually means in practice. I think there's a great deal of confusion about the current system. If we're introducing a new system, standardisation is great, but communicating what it actually means in practice to consumers is absolutely crucial. Just a couple of sort of specific points, if I may, in relation to some of the questions in the paper. And paragraph 7 talks about monitoring and evaluation, and I very much welcome that in relation to consumers. There's a question for us, I think, in terms of evaluation of how businesses use it in practice and whether further work on the sort of scoping and the application of that would be helpful. I would certainly find it helpful in actually understanding the impact on businesses and what happens in practice in relation to any changes that introduce this. And secondly, in relation to the gluten issue, which has already been mentioned, I understand the logic about going through that codex process, but I think it would be helpful for the board somehow to have an update in future about actually what that means in practice and the timescales in relation to that. Thank you.
And I'm not in dissent either. I think between the two sets of times we've reviewed this, actually that round table discussions has been really helpful. I think having standardisation just makes it easier for everybody so that they actually know what they're playing with. And I think it'll just make PAL more accurate and more for people who are intolerant actually really understand what is in the product. So I think it's a benefit.
Thank you, Susan. I think a lot of the points have already been covered, but the ones I just wanted to emphasise how helpful it would be to have an understanding of what the timeline is for this. Obviously, it's got to get approved at Codex first, but at what point does it then come into force? Because it's a voluntary adoption. And so I'm assuming that we will therefore go ahead with it when it gets agreed in the UK. And then is it a four-nation representation that's covered? We represent the UK in this discussion.
No, FSS will do the FSS.
Sorry, apart from Scotland. Yeah, okay. And then the final one is, I think on the consumer communication, it's really important that we're able to understand what it means so that there's a trust element there in a new system. Because if some of the PAL protection, as it's become, is falling away, consumers need to have the confidence that what is still on the label is actually going to enable them to navigate without risk, and whether there is testing that underpins that, given that there's a new threshold now.
Thank you. Yes, I suppose my comments are really just about the governance of this process and how we work towards achieving best outcome. And I guess I wanted just to reflect that the very fact that we've gone through this debate, engaged with stakeholders and charities, and that we're discussing this today, I think demonstrates that we haven't just accepted the international proposal, that we've actually scrutinised it. And, you know, this is a vital issue with real consequences for affected families and individuals. I guess I'm assured that we've addressed this question in detail. I think that we've done that from the known science and also looked at the uncertainties. And on that basis, I'm content with the proposal. I'm obviously interested in how we go forward in the evaluation and how we interact with that as a board and as an organisation. But I think for where we are today, I'm very comfortable with what's being proposed in the paper.
Well, thank you, colleagues, for that and the sort of careful thought that people have given to this. I think Frank made, you know, it's helpful to draw out that important point about the science insofar as it exists suggests that ED08 is the point at which adverse things start occurring, and we're well below that. James, I don't know if there are any specific, I mean, there's, as you can tell, there's broad agreement with these proposals. There's a few items that I want to conclude by just sort of, you know, wrapping up what I think we need to do next. But are there any particular points of sort of fact you want to come back on? I realise I might, could you just clarify the four-nation business? Because I know that Food Standards Scotland are considering this separately, but in the end, is it a single view that goes to Codex from the UK? Can you just
we sit on the committee representing the views of the UK, and we get feed in from Food Standards Scotland on the approach there, so we agree with them as to what we're going to say on that one. Just more broadly, thank you, that was really, really helpful. I think it's worth saying that the Codex proposals absolutely recognise some of the challenges that have been talked about, particularly around the education and communication. So while they're around setting a standard, part of them is the wider education package and also the wider tools for business and ensuring that that risk management is done, because we're very keen that, you know, the message goes out that this isn't about not doing that. It's absolutely expect businesses to push the allergens down as far as humanly possible. This is just about how then we communicate the residual risk to consumers with regards to that, and we need to keep those issues very separate. On the point about the testing methodologies, there is separate Codex work going on to look at the testing methodologies and improvements and standardisation of those, and I'm sure we can produce a note on sort of the current state of play on that. But there's obviously work going on to improve that all the time as well. And then, yes, the monitoring and evaluation in terms of sort of timing as to when this comes in. The earliest it will all get agreed is in July. There's always the chance that something trips up and it moves to a later meeting. But that's the next opportunity in Codex that they as an organisation might bring this forwards for agreement. And then obviously, different countries are implementing things in different ways. We are watching and monitoring that, and we'll be sort of seeing how they progress before we decide what we want to do. I think the one thing we definitely want to do is just keep that communication clear that this international standard doesn't mean we are saying businesses should do less. We're saying businesses should do as much as possible, and the communication needs to be around consumers understanding what that means.
Great, James. Thank you very much for all of that. So helpful to hear about the Codex timeline. I suppose what we want to then do is to think what are the steps that follow from that in the UK. I suggest we, you know, wait until we're clear on when this is going to come back to Codex, rather than sort of, you've got a lot on your plate already in the team. So, but that's something we definitely need to return to, is the implementation. I think you've heard a lot of support for the monitoring and evaluation plan, and I think that needs to form part of our ongoing work about allergen management and assurance and guidance to businesses and so forth. Lots of support for this being us using this as one part of a wider communication strategy, so that there's no point having a standardised approach if people don't know it's standardised and don't understand what that standardisation means in practice. And I think Anthony made some very good and specific points about you know, FSA's own communications, what we have on our website, the point about, you know, how children are taught in schools. I mean, there's an awful lot of practical things which will flow from this codex, any codex decision. So I think that as and when codex do decide, we probably need you to come back to the board and just set out what we will do in the UK as a consequence. The other thing more immediately is around gluten, and I'm very conscious we haven't discussed that at all. There's been a couple of questions about that, and if I could maybe ask you to just do a short briefing for the board about the gluten issue in a little bit more detail so that we understand that a bit better. And also, if the codex discussions are going as you anticipated, there's probably nothing for us to say or do, but if you do feel the board needs to express a view, then we just need some advice really and some general briefing on that. And then the final point, just again to come back to, is our wider allergen work. We agreed a year or so ago that this, was not one of our priority programmes, but it is an important part of our routine work. I have been clear to the new government when new ministers came in, the board's support for Owen's law. It's an issue which comes up in Parliament quite frequently. So we do have opportunities to make the board position clear. At some point, when we come back to thinking about wider allergen management, perhaps when we're thinking about the codex implementation, it will be good to hear about how we think our voluntary, our encouragement for businesses to do this anyway. Do we have any data or any monitoring which tells us whether that's changing practice? Certainly my personal impression is that it's changing practice, but it would be good to have something which was a little bit more objective than just restaurants I happen to go to. So I think those were the main points. You've mentioned testing, we've talked about implementation, we've talked about gluten. So I think I just really want to wrap this up by saying thank you for all the extra work, and the board, I think, are unanimously in support of us supporting the codex proposals, and we look forward to hearing from you when those have gone through the codex process about what the next steps are for us in terms of implementation in the UK. And I think if we're going to do this, let's use it as an opportunity to really put allergen management it's an opportunity to make a point again about good allergen management, which is wider than just PAL. Great, thank you very much, James. I now also need to do a little apology when I totally misread the timings on my agenda. So having chased you all back from coffee, it's because I'd misread the start of the break as being the end of the break. So we're now blissfully ahead of time. And all I can say is I'll reward you with a slightly longer lunch break if we can keep on time for the next agenda items. But yeah, I'm really sorry about that. I didn't think we were running late, but then somehow, yeah, sorry. Anyhow, on to our next item, and this is the annual update from the National Food Crime Unit, and really pleased to welcome Reginald Bevan, who's the Deputy Head of NFCU, to the table. As the name suggests, this is an annual update, but it's a sort of particularly significant one, I think, because this year marks the unit's 10th anniversary. And I think it's clear from the report the real progress that is being made in NFCU, particularly in recent years. But of course, that comes on the back of continuous evolution and development over the last decade. And I do think we can take some pride in the fact that it has significantly improved the integrity of the UK food system. That said, there are clearly particular challenges and pressures which we're facing at the present time, and the report alludes to some of those. So Reginald, I'm going to pass over to you really just to summarise your paper and I guess to draw to the board's attention both particular successes, but also those areas where you know we really need to do more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm pleased to introduce this year's National Food Crime Unit's annual update, which is a year that marks a real step change in our capability and our impact. To begin with, over the last year, we've finally secured PACE powers, and that is something that this board has supported for a long time. These powers came into effect in May, and we have already used them on nearly 20 occasions across 4 different investigations. And what they've done is enabled our officers to secure search warrants, seize evidence, and conduct post-arrest interviews far more efficiently, reducing reliance on policing partners and accelerating our operational pace. Robust governance is in place to reassure you around the use of these powers. To date, we have had no complaints regarding their use. We have listened carefully to last year's board's feedback about the need for a deeper engagement across the food system, particularly on prevention. And as outlined in paragraphs 5 to 5.5, we have strengthened our focus on more face-to-face interactions with businesses, helping them understand where fraud vulnerabilities lie and what practical steps they can take to prevent them. This has included expanding our small and medium enterprise engagement, delivering bespoke in-person training sessions, and building on the foundations established by the Food Fraud Working Group, including the launch of a new training for third-party auditors. The progress on both pursuit and prevention has been matched by significant operational successes. This year, 4 defendants collectively received over 8 years imprisonment for diverting meat unfit for consumption back into the food supply chain, with 1.9 tonnes of illicit product removed. We seized 16 tonnes of misrepresented food product in another case, leading to the arrest of 5 suspects with the investigations ongoing. We have secured guilty pleas in a £500,000 fraud, obtaining proceeds of crime confiscation orders of more than £30,000, and in one case, a £5,500 cash seizure that was subsequently forfeited under the legislation. We have worked jointly with the City of London Police to target food businesses suspected of laundering the proceeds of crime, and including one business with transactions ranging from 100,000 to 13 million. Furthermore, food business operator was recently sentenced to 60 months imprisonment, suspended for 18 months, alongside community orders and costs of around £3,000. And across all of this, our partnership, domestically and internationally, have continued to strengthen, whether through our work on illegal meat imports, our joint sampling programmes, or growing international relationships through the Global Alliance and bilateral cooperation with European partners. The aim remains the same, to ensure that food is safe, and it is what it says it is. An external commentary recently, and I quote, "The NFCU has become an important component of the UK's food system and an increasingly indispensable law enforcement body. Its casework spans waste diversion to dodgy rice, money laundering, to illegal slaughter and international spice fraud, to stolen poultry. The range is enormous, the risks are serious, and without the unit, these risks would be far greater." And that was Professor Chris Elliott in the most recent Food magazine. So, Chair, this paper sets out the unit in a more capable and more assured stance, delivering greater impact than we have previously, and the coming year will be critical in maintaining that momentum. I ask the board to agree the 4 priorities set out on page 9, which are maximising the benefits of our new investigatory powers, strengthening our prevention capability, supporting DEFRA in mitigating the risks of illegal meat imports, and deepening our international collaboration. These represent areas where we believe we can deliver the greatest value, and the greatest protection for consumers. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed. It's really good to see the successful sort of use of the new investigatory powers under PACE, and I well know that if Mark Rolfe and Lord Blencathra, our former board members, were here, they'd be jumping in at this point and celebrate. Well, I'm not sure celebrating is quite the right word, but they'd be very, very pleased to see the really important enforcement outcomes that you've had this year. Enforcement is so important as part of this whole loop because of the message it sends to the bad actors in the system that we will take action. I am frustrated as I know you are at the court delays. Sadly, there's not a lot we can do about that, but I think we do need to recognise that is actually inhibiting our ability to really take the most effective action that we could when we discover bad things happening. Beyond all that routine work, I'm glad that you've put particular emphasis and priority for the future on the illegal meat imports. I know from my conversations with stakeholders, particularly with MPs, there's real concern about what's happening at the border. And all of the work with international partners is going to be really valuable. I wonder, just as my own question, but I'll take others from the board in a moment, what impact you think the potential SPS agreement is going to have? Will that increase your will that increase our work with Europe, or have we already got other systems in place? But I'll ask you to answer. We'll take some other questions from the board, but I'm interested in how SPS might affect your work.
Well, if I can just touch on two things there. Firstly, the work on illegal meats, we're doing a lot of work in that space, as you well know, and as we detailed in the report. And what I can update the board, even last week, one of the significant individuals involved in the illegal import of products of animal origin was arrested. We've recovered a number of items of illegal and protected species, pangolins, bushmeat, and that is an ongoing investigation with some significant potential risks. As for SPS, what that will hopefully allow us access to some previously held information sharing arrangements with Europe. So historically, we would have been copied into general alerts across Europe. We're now only, since leaving the EU, having direct access with something that has a direct link to ourselves. So that would be useful in understanding threats or emerging issues across Europe. But we still have good bilateral arrangements as and when they arise.
Great, thank you. Steve.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Reg and Andy for the report. I thought it was an excellent report, and it actually goes a long way to actually demonstrate the value and the growing impact of the unit as well. I thought that was really helpful, and that step change in enforcement ability with the powers is crucial for the way forward, I think. It's not just about great enforcement outcomes. I think there's some really good examples in the report of excellent work in the prevention arena as well, particularly in section 5 around enhancing our prevention capabilities. I just wondered whether there's scope for greater use of engagement with those external audit systems that you've mentioned and that extra training to enhance that prevention yet further, and whether you've seen any impacts or outcomes of the work done so far in terms of has there been enhanced intelligence to the unit which has enabled other enforcement action or supported other investigations. That was the first question about welcoming that, but also seeing what the impact of that has been so far. Linked to that also, in terms of the partnership work that you were doing, you've mentioned the crucial nature of the partnership both domestically and internationally, how that's working with local authorities and, again, in relation particularly with intelligence sharing. How is the unit supporting intelligence sharing amongst local authorities? Are you getting intelligence from local authorities, for example? So a little bit on that would be helpful for my understanding as well. And then finally, there's a lot of work going on government's priority to tackle crime on the high street. I just wondered whether there's been any engagement from the unit in relation to Operation Mash and Eyes, which brings together trading standards, police forces to tackle a variety of different types of high street crime, whether that's part of the discussions at the moment or not. It may well be, it may not be, but I'd just be intrigued to find out more about that.
Well, what I referred to in the report around our joint work with the City of London Police, that was exactly that. There were a number of different agencies, trading standards, involved in targeting businesses who were essentially the subject of a money laundering investigation, but lots of them were food business outlets. So we were very much involved in that. Going back to your questions around the prevention, and it was developing last year's feedback. We've taken on a head of prevention in recent times who previously worked in industry, so he's got a great perspective and is doing some great work. And yes, we have had some intelligence as a consequence of that third-party training. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. We had one supplier who was, part of that training is around identifying false certificates and what we've encountered in operational activity and what they can look for, and common themes and areas that might suggest to them that things aren't quite what they seem. So there's been one supplier who was falsifying certificates, training certificates, and as a consequence of that, and our input, Red Tractor have then been able to change some of their approach. We've then linked in with the local authorities and AFA. So although we're not leading on it, we are coordinating and ensuring that our intelligence is sharing across those 8 different agencies, and that has uncovered further falsification of certificates. So it's certainly proving fruitful.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to keep going round. Lots over here. Sue, and then Claire, then Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to acknowledge the fantastic work that you guys are doing. Many congratulations. But I wanted to pick up a little bit on the recent EFRACOM report and the recommendations in that DEFRA should work with the NFCU and the Scottish Food Crime and Incident Unit to develop a strategy to tackle illegal meat imports. And my understanding is that that's something that's not going to happen until after the SPS agreement goes through in 2027. We should be mindful of the fact that there's recently been an outbreak of African swine fever in Spain. It's decimated the Spanish pork industry, cost them tens of millions of pounds. African swine fever is a disease for which there is no vaccine, there's no treatment, and there's the potential for that to devastate the pork industry in the UK as well. I just wondered whether you feel you're getting the support from DEFRA that you need, because they're obviously very busy doing the SPF, and what that enhanced collaboration with DEFRA that you mentioned under your areas for focus on for the coming year, what that looks like.
So, Reg, I'm going to just stop you. There's loads of comments, so we'll definitely come back to that. I'll ask you to pick it up at the end, but let's just scoop around some of the other questions.
Thank you very much. Really comprehensive paper, and agree with the areas of focus, and great to see some of the achievements. Just a couple of comments quite similar to Steve's. Having been out yesterday with the Reading EHOs, it's clear that they are the eyes and ears on the ground, and the trading standards officers as well. You talk about training for industry, which I think is really important to continue, but also what more can we do with the local authorities in terms of helping them look out for these things and provide that intelligence. And then secondly, it was really just around the fines that sometimes seem very, very low for some of these crimes. And it's just what more can we do to raise awareness of that and try and get a bit more of a proportionate, I guess, result. And I know that that's difficult, but thank you.
Actually, my point was a follow-on there from Claire's, which is the deterrent value. Brilliant work, but there's 2 big factors. One is the delay in the criminal justice system, which is without our control and a problem right across the system. But in the sentencing, we tend to be sentencing at the lower end of the scales. And I just wondered, is there any way, any possibility, it's not a question for Reg, more for yourself, that we can actually make an approach to the judicial training boards and the sentencing guideline committees of the various jurisdictions to actually get across, particularly to magistrates, the importance of public safety and the value of the crimes that are being committed, so that the punishment sort of reflects that. So
that's a good point. Fiona.
I'm going to continue the theme. We've discussed the delays in the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service system, a lot at ARIC. It's very much a live issue. And I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about how you're actually engaging with the lawyers there and whether you're starting to nudge them forward in terms of prioritisation, because the big concern is that those businesses can continue to trade and that potentially puts consumers at risk in that interim period.
Thank you. Well, just a big thanks, I think, to Andy and Reginald and indeed the unit for what they've achieved. We've marked its 10 years, and it was interesting listening to the other comments around the table, because we're all so enthusiastic. We're trying to sort of push the system to see what more could be delivered. And what really strikes me is that intuitively we know that for kind of every pound invested, there's a huge dividend that's come back both publicly and in health outcome. So my question is, can we do something more to demonstrate that to those that best need to hear it? So whether that's an economic evaluation of the delivery and also in terms of the health outcomes that have been achieved. Because essentially what we're saying in these comments around the table is that we want more of this. We want it to be more effective. We want more delivery because of the fantastic success that it's been and the contribution it's making. So my question back, perhaps Reginald, but perhaps to us more broadly, is there scope within our own review of our processes around doing an economic evaluation of the impact so we can make that case more coherently and more forcefully with those that need to hear it?
Thanks, Tim. I think that's an interesting point about demonstrating, the return on investment, I suppose, is one way of thinking about it. I think we should ask the team to take that away and consider whether there's anything that can be done in that area. I certainly constantly challenge myself. We've grown the NFCU from, I don't know what it was, 20 people or something up to 80, I think we've got at present. Well, is 80 the right number? Or, I imagine if we had, 100, then we'd be doing even more. Katie, do you want to comment on this?
Well, I was just going to say on that, I think the time when it's most useful to do the exercise that Tim's been talking about there is when we're going into spending review negotiations, because we are now set for this SR period. And going into the SR, we did make the case for the NFCU. So maybe we hold that for the right time rather than doing it right now, but completely take the point.
Thank you. So I think there were sort of 3 key points there, and I'm conscious, I know that Andy Quinn, who's the head of the units, offered a big food crime safety conference abroad, isn't with us, so it may be that other EMT colleagues want to come in on this, but I think there are 3 issues. One is, can we do more on gathering local authority intelligence? Can we use them more as our sort of foot soldiers? The second is around fines, the deterrent value. And I think, Anthony, you make a good point as whether there's something that I can do in terms of writing. And I think that's something that I should take away as an action, talk to Katie and James as our sort of legal advisors to think whether, and I think it is the point you make about ensuring people are clear about the consequences of this, because, as Sue laid out, some of those consequences are existential for some parts of the industry and can be catastrophic for public health. So that's one for us. And then the third one is this issue of illegal meat, and it is in the forward plan. What I think I'm going to ask there, rather than for a detailed discussion now, is I think it would be helpful if the board could have a note on what this future work looks like. says we're going to work more with DEFRA. Well, what does that actually mean in practice? And what might we expect to see as a result of this greater effort? So I think probably best to do that in writing rather than to ask you to, unless there's some headlines. I think there's a sampling programme which you might want to tell us about. So yeah, local authorities, illegal meat, and I'll take away the issue about the deterrent value and can we boost that. Reg, do you want to comment very briefly? And then I don't know if Junior might want to come in.
Yeah, so very briefly, your point about, can we undertake some training with environmental health and better gather intelligence? Listen, we can still learn quite a lot from what the environmental health and training standards teams are already doing. They presented at our most recent conference 2 teams from different LAs. So we're very much alive to that, and they are part of our training schedule around preventative work, and we've we very much see them as the frontline response. CPS, I think we have a good engagement with CPS. There are a lot of factors that contribute to the court delays, not just about prioritising whether our cases are worthy. There's lots of factors, and I gave an example previously of one interesting delay where there was just no court ushers on that day, and our case was adjourned. So that's issues that are beyond our control. Our proceeds of crime results will certainly contribute to some of that economic evaluation. There are some funds that are coming back, but there are broader benefits that I think we can weave into that at some stage. But I think
Great.
Hopefully
Thank
answers.
You. Junior, did you just want to wrap up?
Thanks, Reg. Just want to come in on a couple of things. So just in relation to our engagement with local authorities, just building on what Reg was saying, it's also important to note that we actually get a lot of intelligence, whistleblowing that doesn't meet the thresholds for us to investigate. And those cases and instances get referred back into the local authority trading standards officers as a pretty routine way of working. And we've also got access to their intelligence database that we use quite frequently. So there are ongoing conversations, there are ongoing investigations, and as Reg says, they are very much viewed as our sort of like front line, especially for the cases that don't meet the threshold. And that's most of the intelligence that we actually receive doesn't meet the threshold for us to investigate, but we help and assist them with how to interpret the information that we send them and actually give them pointers on what they should do with that. Just wanted to touch on...
Can I just come in on one point there? So, and it's worthy of note, we can only act independently at FSA approved premises. So everything else which comes under the remit of local authorities, we must engage with them. So we're, as Junior was saying, we are disseminating intelligence to them almost daily, and we are always liaising with them.
Just wanted to touch on the work very briefly that we are doing with DEFRA and building strategy. So it was noted that the EFRA committee referenced NFCU several times as the need for us to work closely together, and they recognise the use and the value that our intelligence brings. We're also supporting ministerial groups with DEFRA and other colleagues and Home Office to actually look and do our joint investigations. And that work and that intelligence and the evidence base that we'll start to collate from that should at some point formulate and help develop a more sort of like coordinated strategy for actually how we combat the border, the threats of the border. And then the final thing I was just going to touch on was in relation to the work that, as Reg says, that we do really closely with the CPS. One of the things that have changed in the last year is we've actually now got what I would call an account manager that works for the Crown Prosecution Service, who heads up their operations as opposed to their legal side. And that's been really helpful for us throughout this year in particular, where we've had quite a few of our cases questioned about, is this in the public interest? So having that conduit has been really helpful because they get the value, they get the importance of what it is we do, and they're able to advise us on how best to actually interact with the judicial side and the lawyers who are making those decisions. And then from a personal perspective, I am meeting quite regularly now with the Chief Executive of Her Majesty's Court and Tribunal Service. So we get together quarterly, and actually the instances and the issues that Reg brings up, I'm able to bring those so he's getting real life feedback of some of the issues and challenges that we're seeing.
Thanks very much. It's really good to hear about the interactions which are already underway with the local authorities and that joint working. And also, Junior, just about your engagement with the sort of more legal end of things. And, you know, let's join up afterwards to see whether I can bolster that in any way. Frank, did you?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just a question about some other issues. So while I see that meat, illegal meat, imported meat, etc., is the biggest risk, and it's right that the food crime unit focuses on that. There are other things, which we as FSA, in our statement about food is what it says to be, should be concerned about. Adulterated honey, basmati rice, which isn't basmati, so all of those kinds of things. And I wonder where they sit. Do they sit within the remit of the food crime unit? Is it an issue for the local authority? How do we as an organisation keep a grip on some of these, perhaps less risk to the public health, but important to the public in terms of their perceptions?
Yeah, absolutely important. Junior's itching to come in. So, yeah.
So, Frank, the first thing we do biannually, we develop what's called a strategic assessment of food crime, and that sets the strategy and the framework for the sorts of things that both us and FSS, Food Standards Scotland, will sort of like focus our attention on. And we've got different priorities across the UK. So what we then tend to do is develop what we call our control strategy. And in that control strategy, those are the things that we will prioritise and focus our attention and resources on. Honey and illegal meat imports, adulteration, rice, they're all in there.
And we did have a big success on rice case recently, so yeah, that's firmly on the list. But and this absolutely speaks to this resourcing issue, because some of the, we clearly prioritise things where there is fraud and a public health risk, but we absolutely, because of the authenticity issues, and we don't want consumers to be ripped off by having, paying over the odds for foods which are not what they say they are. But yeah, there's so much to be done. Always lots of interest in this paper. Thank you so much, Reg, and to Andy and the rest of the team for all that you do. It's clear it's been a really positive year. The unit's on an upward trajectory in terms of its sort of, capabilities, its sort of just capacity, and we look forward to that continuing next year. Great that the PACE powers are already, proving valuable. I think you said there have been 20 incidents already, so that's certainly noted. We certainly agree with the areas for the future, but I do think we would like to have some additional briefing around the illegal meat thing. Both you and Junior have talked quite a lot about process and engaging with DEFRA, and all of those things are great. I'd quite like to know, what are we actually doing? And I know there is a sampling programme underway. It would be good to understand the timelines for that. When will we start having some, some data? So I think just let us understand that a bit more fully, please. Great. On that note, thank you very much. And yeah, that's all for now.
Thank you.
So we move on to the next item, which is another annual update, and this is from the communications team. So hello to Claire Forbes, who's our Director of Communications. It's certainly been a busy time for news in the external environment, and I know the comms team have been very busy. Food items always feature heavily in the news, and how we respond to that and the information we provide to consumers is really an essential component of keeping consumers safe, but also demonstrating what the FSA does. As consumers, we're clearly bombarded with more information than ever before, and also we are helped, they say, by AI assimilating some of that information for us. But I think, as Claire's paper sets out, that is sometimes a mixed blessing. I know the team have been looking at this in a bit more detail, so quite keen, Claire, if you might expand a little bit more, perhaps than what's in the paper on what you've been doing in that area. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Susan. Just before I start, I should also note there were a couple of questions submitted by members of the public on this paper. So we might touch on some of those issues, but obviously we'll respond fully in due course according to the usual process for responding to all questions. So as Susan has said, the paper is our annual update to board. It looks back on the performance of the team across all three nations over the last 12 months, and also looks forward to some of our priorities for the coming year. So just in terms of looking back, some of our areas of focus over the last year have of course been FSA 25 and our internal communications with our people to mark that event, and really to think about that as an opportunity for learning about what's gone before and thinking about what's ahead of us. We've also really developed our partnership work, and some of the details of that are in the paper. And you also got an example of some of the campaigns that we've run, focusing both on different consumer groups, but also businesses. It was a year ago today that we were sitting at Church House, and the board first touched on the topic of misinformation, because at that point we were had been dealing with some of the misinformation around Bovaer, and that conversation really triggered us to do a lot of work in thinking about our response as an agency to misinformation. So we touched on that in the paper. I'd be very happy to expand on that as well if board members would like to. And as Susan has said, also this year, I think we've seen a real shift in the use of AI in communications terms. So particularly in things like web searches, where now actually you put in a web search into a search engine and you're likely to get an AI generated summary at the top of your results. And we've seen the impact of that in terms of quite significant drops in visits to our website. While this is a new means for consumers to access information, we're really keen to ensure that that information is accurate, and we're working very closely with colleagues across government, and in particular the NHS, who are doing a lot of work on this to really make sure that those large language models are reproducing information that is up to date and accurate. And then just before I finish, the paper also looks forward to some of our priorities for the year ahead, many of which actually will touch on the topics that we've been talking about today, particularly thinking about our contribution to growth and innovation, and also some of our other work thinking about particular audience groups. So Susan, I'll pause there, and obviously very happy to take any questions from board members.
Thanks, Claire. Whole range of issues there. So I'm going to, give people a chance to jump in on them. Louise.
I'd just say thank you for the paper, and it was really good for me to be able to sort of see, I suppose, the breadth of the communication team, that you're internal and external. And I've just got one question of where you've said you've dropped by 16% on the website search because of the AI element. Have you got any measure across either other government sectors as to whether we've had more impact or whether we've fared better?
So we are very much in touch with other government departments on this, and we know that it's something which is being experienced across the board. I think it's important to say that this is any way that consumers are accessing information, so it's an opportunity for us as well as a risk. And so we are, as I mentioned, the NHS is very actively looking at this because of obviously concerns about people getting wrong information about health. And so we're liaising with colleagues at the Department of Health and Social Care, and they're connecting us through to the NHS to really work out best practice in managing these kinds of AI summaries. The sorts of things that we know work are making sure that information is is short and concise, so avoiding too much kind of elaborate language, making sure that information is up to date, because large language models tend to prioritise most recent information. So if there's information on our website, but there's a more up-to-date social media thread, then there will be conflicts in terms of what gets summarised in those AI summaries.
Thanks. Rhian.
Thanks, Claire. Great report. I'm very encouraged about it's evident that there's 3 country working. You know, the team in Wales, you know, really benefit from that. You know, there's obviously economies on a number of fronts, but it's good to see that cohesion. And I'm also pleased to see the Welsh language social media in the forward look. You know, it is a small group of consumers, but nonetheless a really important part of our Welsh sort of consumer landscape. So I'm really glad about that. I suppose the 2 points I wanted to mention were firstly about our Senedd elections next year. I know you're acutely aware of this. Just, you know, keeping up the pace of Senedd member briefings and Senedd events and engaging with the Senedd Youth Parliament, because there's been some great work across the team to raise awareness of FSA in Wales, and the trick now is not to lose that momentum when we possibly get quite a change of the guard in Wales. So that was the first thing. And then the other thing is just the bit about porting our website across to gov.uk. There are some, and I've spoken to Julia earlier on today about this, there's some concerns sort of amongst the team in Wales about just not losing the accessibility of the Welsh language provision. Totally appreciating that the new format is delivered by experts, so you know we know that, but just making sure that the nature of the Welsh language on the website is appropriate, because there's Welsh and then there's Welsh. And just making sure that we get the most information and impact for Welsh speakers that we have already, not losing that. Thank you.
Very good. Steve, we'll just gather them up, Claire, and then come back to Steve.
Thank you. I think it's a great report, and I was particularly impressed that 78% of people with at least some knowledge of the FSA trust us to ensure that food is safe and say it is what it says it is. So that's an increase from the previous survey, and 78% seems like a very sort of strong result. So that's sort of a powerful outcome measure, I think, of the activity of the FSA. Just a query about, do we understand what's driven that in terms of the maintaining or increasing the trust in the FSA? So it'd be good to have a feel for that. And just sort of a sub-question in relation to that, what does it mean when we say with at least some knowledge of the FSA? I guess my sort of cynical approach would be if only 5% of people have some knowledge of the FSA, that means that's not a very good measure of overall understanding and trust in the FSA as a whole. So is there any absolute measure, or are we just using that with some knowledge of the FSA? So, and what does that mean? I hope that makes sense. It made sense to me when I was thinking about it anyway.
Okay, anything else from colleagues? If not, why don't we... Oh, Fiona, sorry.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Claire. I continue to be impressed by the amount of work that you're able to do on such a small budget. Know from our kit calls that you've got a very good team there. I would be really interested to find out a little bit more about some of the misinformation you're navigating, and I think that probably falls into a couple of categories. One is when we do have an incident of some sort and misrepresentation around facts and escalation of a scare factor, but also the general trends around misinformation on food. And you know, one topic that comes up in our surveys is UPF. There's a lot of scope for misinformation around that, but there are probably many other topics that it'd be interesting to hear about a bit more about that.
Good. So Claire, I think 3 chunky items there, a bit more about trust. Maybe let's sort of start with that one and Steve's specific comments. The work we do in Wales, and I think Rhian makes a really good point about how we maintain engagement over the pre-election and election period, and then preparing potentially for a new government. And then this issue that Fiona mentions about mis and disinformation, and I think some tangible examples there. I don't know whether ultra-processed food is the best example. I'm sure it's one of them. We've also had the Bovaer issues, or that was a little while back now. Yeah, those three topics, please.
Thank you very much. So yes, on trust, Steve, as you pointed out, we've seen an uplift in the trust scores in the last wave of research, which is really encouraging. During the year, working with our colleagues in CERD, we actually did some research into what drives trust from a communications point of view. So we know that visibility drives trust. So, and that is overwhelmingly broadcast media. News media, broadcast media in particular, can lead to that visibility that drives trust. But we also know that things like being perceived as being transparent and honest and consistent in our communications are really important factors in driving trust as well. And so that research has been really useful in kind of ensuring that we really emphasise those elements in our communications. So, in our research, it was 78% of respondents who had at least some knowledge of the FSA trusted us to do our job. I think quite a lot of the public will know us from the stickers, the food hygiene rating stickers that you see in the doorways of kind of cafes and restaurants. So even if people may not know a huge amount about our work behind the scenes as a regulator, that's a really visible symbol that we are there protecting people, and also I think a really big reputational incentive for businesses as well to drive up standards. So those stickers are incredibly powerful, I think, as a builder of trust. If I could come on to Rhiann's point around Welsh language. So yes, our Welsh social media channels are now live. They're still kind of growing, but I think just over the last couple of days, they've really come into their own with some of the messaging that we've been able to put out in Welsh about the recent storm that's obviously impacted on Welsh communities in the last couple of days. So it's been really good to be able to sort of see them come into their own with that type of messaging that's obviously been very kind of targeted. And yes, the Welsh team are, I think, thinking really hard about the Senedd elections and how we can make sure that we are communicating with members and providing briefings. And in fact, I reviewed the plan for that just in the last, I think yesterday. So that is something that they are very actively thinking about. And we are, together with Julie's team and ODD, actively talking to the Government Digital Service as part of the migration about the Welsh language and ensuring that the parity between Welsh and English, which is so important to us as an agency, is maintained. So that's very much on the agenda. And then finally, Fiona, in terms of misinformation, some of the work that we've been doing in the last year following what happened about 12 months ago with regard to Bovaer is we've been working to identify which topics we feel are at greatest risk of kind of misinformation. So that might be around specific food additives, obviously things like cell-cultivated proteins, which are very new and largely unknown, may also sort of be at risk. And we've been working with the Science Council to both think about what those topics might be and also to get their advice in terms of how we respond. So we have a piece of work underway which includes the production of simple explainers that we can use should misinformation about particular topics flare up. We've already got that content in our back pockets. That includes things like video content, which is very accessible and works well on social media, so that we can respond quickly and get accurate information out there.
Thank you, Claire. That's all really, really good to hear. Can I just focus the board's attention on the sort of priorities that are set out in the report for next year? As we've said, this is a small team. There's a huge amount of routine day-to-day work. There's the sort of regular, dare I say, routine of things that are, you know, of reactive work. And so when we're thinking about areas which we really want to prioritise and put effort into, I think we need to be very clear that these are things that we really want to put an extra effort on. So yeah, keen to hear people's views. I might just start by making a point about the annual report, because in a way this is a sort of it's kind of half, oh, this is what we're not doing and this is what we will do. So we've published, I think, a really important annual report for the last few years on food standards across the UK. I think it has been valued by stakeholders as giving that very objective data-led assessment of food standards. However, what we're now seeing is there are a number of similar-ish or, related reports around, whether that's from other government departments like the UK Food Security Report, or indeed from some of the civil society groups, things like the Food Foundation's Broken Plate report. And there's an awful lot of overlap in statistics. And so I do think it is important, and this is why it's in there as a priority, is for us to do a real strategic review about what that report is delivering, what's its niche, and how we can get best value for money. So I'm personally very, very keen that we do that. I don't want to lose the value that report adds. But I do want to ensure that we and everybody else are using resources most effectively and not duplicating effort. Migrating the website content, Rian's touched on. I know that's essentially a decision that has been made, but involves a fair amount of work, so we clearly need to do that. But some of the other points, I'm interested in people's comments. So the other ones are the promoting our enforcement activity. This links back to the previous NFCU paper. The work on food regulation, and that again, I think, given the conversation we had earlier about the new programme of work on the future of food regulation, the comms in that is going to be absolutely vital as part of taking stakeholders with us on that journey, but also that two-way function of hearing from them. And the bilingual work. But any specific comments from people on the priorities or things that are missing that you expected to see? Frank?
Yeah, the priorities are fine. My only concern is, given the capacity that we've heard about in the team, is that, and building on Fiona's point, we need to be fleet of foot, and we need to build in capacity to respond when there's misinformation or when there's concerns in the public. So, an 80-20 rule would be my kind of rule of thumb, I suppose, that 80% of our time is spent on the agreed priorities, but we need to have flexibility in the team to be able to jump and respond as needed. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, point well made. Claire.
It was just a quick point. Totally agree with the priorities. In terms of targeting communications, I'm just conscious that there are a lot of consumers that perhaps don't have access to social media and website. So I think just I know we've mentioned the Wales channel, but just to make sure that continues to be a priority to reach vulnerable groups.
Claire, do you want to say something about the sort of partnership working? I know that you've been putting a lot of effort into.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we shouldn't be relying on social media to kind of get our messages across, or shouldn't be assuming that people are just seeing our messages on social media, although it is an important channel. And that's one of the reasons why we've been developing our partnership work, recognising that with the resources that we have, our reach is quite limited. We don't have huge budgets for advertising and such like. So making sure that we're really partnering with the right partners who can help us reach those audiences who are most at risk, or those businesses that perhaps would most benefit from our guidance, has been a kind of key priority for us this year. So we've done some really successful work in partnering with some of the aggregators, for example, and helping us to reach small businesses. And we've worked with the NUS to help us reach students who might be leaving home and cooking for themselves for the first time, and also with a variety of different charities that can help us reach particular vulnerable groups. So yeah, that is a growing area for us.
Great, Claire, thank you very much indeed. Can I encourage everybody to look out for the Christmas campaign? And I think this is very, it's really good. It's very engaging. I think content. But I'm also really pleased that on top of the general food sort of safety messages, you've put in a sort of reiteration of our advice on smoked fish for vulnerable groups. We know that sales of smoked salmon shoot up at this time of year, and so it is important. And we all want to enjoy it safely, but just I think it's a great opportunity to re-promote that advice for vulnerable groups. Very good. Thank you to you and all the team for all this work. Right, we're moving on now to some of the onto the annual governance report. So this is over to Tim, who's not only our deputy chair, but is the board lead for governance.
Thank you very much. So this is our annual governance report for 2025. The risk, I think, with a governance report is you might think it's quite turgid, and therefore it's just a sort of routine work-a-day thing. Actually, I want to argue with you that it's really exciting, because this is basically how we service the car to take us to all those exciting places in food world. So what I want to talk to you about is what we've done, and to a certain degree where we go, but also there's some small bits of servicing, if you like, that we need to attend to, but nothing serious. Overall, we've got some, I want to talk to you about the annual review of board effectiveness, which we undertook, which again was rather like my analogy around the servicing, to look at just are we fit for purpose, is there more we can do, can we tweak the organisation to better serve what we're trying to achieve. And we've certainly got at the annex the outcome of the board effective review. The nice point about that is that many of the things identified which challenged, I think, whether we do have the processes and the governance that's fit for purpose, we have grabbed, considered, and where necessary are attending to. And two of the outstanding issues I had the opportunity to chat with Anthony and also to Anne in Board Secretariat was about how we use ARAC and the opportunities that exist there about review, about have we got the thresholds right for putting forward issues to the board, but also about horizon scanning as well, so that are we foresighted sufficiently. We did look also, and I had a conversation with Susan around this in terms of the are we getting enough energy into reacting and responding? Are we not getting too caught up in bureaucracy? And we decided actually that things had moved on really since the insights from the review, and I think today's agenda has demonstrated the responsiveness and energy in the forward agenda. So I think again it's nice to know that having these conversations promotes change for the better. Some of the other things to consider here are there are some minor changes around how we describe things in the board operating framework. There's a small change in the ARAC terms of reference about including a general counsel, and also the post name change in and around Ian's role. So hopefully fairly much housekeeping issues. I'm also asking through this paper that we reaffirm the terms of reference for the business committee and indeed for the board, and the standing orders for the board, which remain as they were. So I commend to you the paper. I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I'm really pleased that I think all of the recommendations from the last internal board effectiveness review have been taken forward. And I might also note, I should have probably said this at the start, that we're joined as observers today by the GIAA, who are undertaking our external board effectiveness review, which will receive the report in the new year. So I don't know if there are any specific questions for Tim. I think the changes proposed to the ARAC attendance and the sort of inclusion of the updates on procurement are, as you say, essentially tidying up housekeeping. Anthony's nodding his assent to that as chair of ARAC. Are there any other questions people have, either on the paper or indeed broader governance issues within the FSA? Louise?
Mine was just a real query, really. On the board operating framework, who has to approve it? Is it for us to approve, or does someone else have to approve the change to the wording?
I believe it's us to approve it.
Self-regulation in action. But done open and transparently. Any other questions for Tim? Okay, if not, then we'll accept this paper, accept the amendments that have been proposed, and reaffirm the terms of reference and the standing orders for our other committees. Thank you. Very good. So I think that might actually bring us, it does indeed bring us to lunch. We are a little bit ahead of ourselves. That was time mostly from earlier in the day, but we saved a little bit, I think, in that last item. We will, I think, break now because I think that is probably most helpful for keeping the agenda on track. But given it's only just shortly after 12, I suggest that we do pick up again early this afternoon. I hope that means we don't miss people who are only joining for the afternoon, but I suggest we come back again. Would 12:45 be reasonable? Is that okay? Great. So thank you, everybody, and hope to, see colleagues around the table back again afterwards, but hope those who are listening online will also join us again at 12:45. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody, and we're into the final part of our board meeting today with some of the sort of standing reports from the subcommittees. So we're going to start with the report for, actually, this is the annual report, I think, isn't it? It's the annual report from the chair of the Northern Ireland Food Advisory Committee, really reflecting on the past year of work. So, Anthony, over to you.
Thank you. The paper itself is pretty self-explanatory. It gives an overview of the work of the last 12 months and a forward look as to where we think we'll go in the following year. As highlighted in the paper, the committee has explored a wide range of themes, and we've had an opportunity to engage with a lot of the FSA teams on a number of issues as well as external stakeholders. And just to put on record my thanks to all of the FSA teams who come along. There's quite a lot of work in and around and behind the scenes that you don't actually see. The paper provides detail on the meetings and themes, but the one that I wanted to draw particular attention to was the meeting that we held in October, exploring local authority engagement. We had representatives from each of the district councils in Northern Ireland who attended and presented to NIFAC on a wide variety of topics and issues, from sampling to prosecutions to the food standards delivery model. And as you've heard today from a number of people, it's a stark reminder of the volume of work that the actual councils do and the work that they undertake, and actually the importance of our relationship with them. I don't think we can actually overstate that. It's the second time we've had such a session at NIFAC, and what I've now agreed is that we're going to do this annually because I think it is worth maintaining that relationship going forward at that level. As well as the themed meetings, NIFAC has continued to meet ahead of each of the board to consider the board papers. These meetings enable me to share the Northern Ireland view and the NIFAC members' views here today, and it's good that we have those. We've also been able to have a couple of those meetings with jointly with WFAC, and it's good that the two teams, I think, are joining up and being able to have a look at that. In terms of looking ahead, we've a number of themes planned out for next year, and hopefully we'll finalise those in the next week or two, but there's at least 3 there that you can see. And of course, I'll work closely with Rhiann going forward in terms of WFAC to make sure that we take as consistent a theme as we possibly can, so that we're each hitting the same sorts of areas, but allowing for the fact that there are specific areas either in Wales or Northern Ireland that we will want to draw out. But happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Anthony. It's great to see the work that you've undertaken over the last year, and I really welcome the joint working with WFAC. I think it's useful to be reminded of the themed meetings that NIFAC have done, and I'd be interested in any comments people have on potential topics for the future. But really over to other members of the board. Fiona.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. I always really enjoy reading these reports, partly because it gives me ideas as to how we perhaps could be engaging as a board with some of the sectors. And I'd be really interested in seeing whether we could have a meeting with some local authority leads at some point. It'll be really important for the work of future regulation going forward. But also a question as to whether, when we do visit Wales and Northern Ireland, whether we have a chance to have a meeting jointly with those members. I think it helps us to understand your territory, but also it helps us to understand how we work together collectively as a group.
Yes, I think that's definitely possible. There's no reason why not. As I say, I'm going to meet with them annually, and we can certainly arrange something for the board the next time it comes back to Belfast.
So Fiona, just to clarify, were you think in terms of engagement for this board, were you thinking of that being with local authorities or with NIFAC?
I mean, both. I think they're two separate things.
Okay, so I think the engagement with local authorities, I absolutely take the point, and I think in a way the message from the regulation, the future of food regulation discussion earlier was that we really need to be listening to stakeholders, and whilst most of that will happen at official level, I definitely think it's worth the board being part, or at least some members of the board being part of that conversation. So I suggest we scope that out a little bit more as we think about how to take that working group forward. We have in the past, when we've come to Northern Ireland, we've often had dinners or other sort of networking events with NIFAC and indeed with some of the wider stakeholders. But when we're in Wales next year, so it will be the year after, it'll be 2027 when we're next have a board meeting in Northern Ireland, but we could certainly think about what's the best format for us to do that. I think it would have to be something that was tied in with the board meeting, given that we're all over there, rather than something bespoke.
One of the things I have done is, just to say that I made an open offer, as has Rianne, to any of the new board members to join, particularly the board preparation meetings or any of the meetings that NIFAC do and WFAC as well, just to see and hear. And sometimes it's a good betting in. So anybody who wants to join is always, the public can join as well, most of these things. So it's quite open.
Thank you, Anthony. And I was thinking, we may have the opportunity to do something like that in Wales. Is there a shared topic that we could usefully meet on together to discuss? The other thing I just wanted to mention about Northern Ireland, you have got this additional role and responsibilities for public health. And I continue to ask that we are able to keep that in the spotlight as a way of potentially informing what we might be able to do in this country.
The dietary health work, yep.
Yes, we do, and hopefully what we're trying to do is use that to leverage into the wider FSA as well, because that's where we have the responsibility, but we disseminate all of the stuff that comes out of it as much as we possibly can.
And we're sort of keeping a watchful eye on the way the plans in England around healthy food standards evolve, and so we can see how we can join that up. Very good. Anything more for Anthony? No, well, it was great to be in Belfast earlier this year and to have a chance to meet with some stakeholders there, and indeed with the some of our ministers in the Parliament during the afternoon. So I know that you and Andy Cole, our director in Northern Ireland, do a huge amount to both enhance and sustain and enhance our relationships there. So thank you very much for all of that work. Good. So moving on, we have got the report. Oh, it's you, Anthony, again. Report of the November ARAC meeting.
I'm beginning to feel like James at this point. Can I just say that we had a very long, detailed meeting of ARAC this time. There was a lot of papers that we got through and a lot of issues that we put through, but the main thing that we were focused on was the certification and approval of the annual report and accounts. We had the National Audit Office there as well, who gave us their update on where it was, and I'm glad to say they gave us a clean audit opinion. And following discussions with them, following the guidance, I was then able to reassure Katie as Chief Executive and Accounting Officer that it was fine to sign the accounts, so she's dutifully signed the accounts. And yesterday they were led in both houses, which was great. So my congratulations to Ian, Ed, Steve and the team. They did a fantastic job, and to the NAO, because we've actually pulled it forward by at least 6 weeks this year. And next year we're aiming to actually get it done and get it all led by October. So we're really improving and moving forward. In terms of the other areas, they're all self-explanatory, but happy to take any issues. And I should say we also did a very good training exercise in the afternoon on the National Food Crime Unit and the work that it did and the deep dive into it. So I know we had the paper today. That was a bit of a coincidence, but the training was very, very good. And I think it would give a good overview to members about what they do.
Great. Yes, I know that some of the new board members have sort of fed back to me how valuable that training is. And I know you're planning some more general ARAC training, which I should say, if any other board members want to join in with that, please do. We do tend to review committee membership sort of each year, and so if not now, maybe later. So you'll find yourself on ARAC. So it's all useful professional development, I think, for board members. Any comments from anybody who was at the ARAC meeting? Anything you want to bring to our attention, or any questions from other people? No? Okay. We'll move on then to the report from the Business Committee. Tim.
Thank you, Chair. You've got the report before you of the most recent Business Committee meeting, which was held on the 1st December. I think I won't go verbatim through and read the performance report, but you can see that we were certainly focused on the operational delivery side and noted where there had been some data issues and sampling failures, and the committee will keep a review of the thresholds for those incidents. I'll come on to local authority delivery, and also we kept ourselves appraised of what was happening in respect of market authorisations and regulated products. A small focus on from this report around the performance management framework for the food standards delivery model. We heard the reported performance, and we considered that. We recognised that what was introduced under that model and the performance framework is an attempt to make the best use of resources to meet delivery levels. And we also understood the milestones that were met, but there were logistics and on-the-ground issues around recruitment and delayed inspections that militated against progress. We use the phrase mixed performance, but in some cases there is underperformance, and we realised that we needed to understand what it is reasonable to do under the performance framework. And the committee were unified in their view that wherever possible we wanted to see timescales accelerated, but also recognise the real world situation around the situations of workforce on the ground and also the backlog. Our upshot from that was that we reiterated the message about increasing pace where it is reasonable and possible to do so, and the Business Committee is going to keep on the case by monitoring progress. Thank you. I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. We did have a pretty rigorous conversation about this, and it's a question of how do we balance our responsibility, which is to ensure that statutory responsibilities are being met and the public is being protected. How do we uphold that whilst at the same time understanding that setting completely unrealistic, doesn't just by setting a more rigorous target doesn't actually mean you get there. So I think it's a real, I do want this to be seen as a joint effort by us and by local authorities to get this right. We all want the same thing and we need to work together to make that happen. But I think it's absolutely, in the end, we are responsible for performance management of the system and reporting on that, and we've got to keep that uppermost in our mind. It's a tricky one. Louise?
I'd just like to comment. I went to my first business committee this last month. And particularly for me, having gone and seen the EHO visit yesterday versus the conversation we had in the committee, it was really well balanced. And having spoken with the council yesterday, almost they are mindful to make sure that they're reflecting actually how they are delivering, and they know it's not necessarily where it needs to be, but actually it's a reflection of the resources they've got to do that and the environment that they're working in. So for me, it was really good to see that tension, but also both being really real with the situation.
I mean, the one thing I think we really learnt is that the new food standards delivery model is giving us better and more accurate data, and that has got to be the starting point of driving improvement in the system. So, we are a step further forward, even though there's a pretty long road to go. Katie, did you want to?
We talked a couple of times about our responsibilities, and I was just going to say our statutory responsibility is to monitor and report on the performance. And actually, I think we do a lot more than that, which is good because we are trying to make the system work. And that performance management process that we're talking about is a critical part of enabling local authorities to actually make the case for the resources. So I think it's important to show we're not approaching this in the spirit of kind of beating people with a stick. It's actually often very welcomed by food teams.
Any questions from other people, perhaps who weren't at the business committee? Just to remind you, they've got a very short report here. That's because the meeting was only last week. But there will be full minutes from the meetings, which we will make available when we do the minutes of the board meeting, and that you have already got access to the papers that we received at that meeting. So if you want more detail, you can look in the performance management dashboard. Sorry, that's just a bit of, I'm very conscious we throw a lot at our new board members, and it's just trying to help you to navigate the system and what you can find where. Okay. There's nothing else. We'll move on to the next item, and this is back to just the short reports from the chairs of the food advisory committees on the latest meetings, and if there was anything in particular which hasn't come up elsewhere in this meeting that you wanted to tell us about. And I suggest we start with Rhian.
Thank you, Susan. So at WFAC we're a complement of 8 members. One of us has recently come off the committee, so Jessica Williams has done her second term. So my thanks to Jessica for all her time and effort in contributions to WFAC, and we've welcomed one new member on, which Lindsay Horth, who's got very deep knowledge in the trading standards space in particular. So we're at our full complement, and that really makes a difference when you're sitting around the table, as we know from our board memberships ebbing and flowing. And I really feel we've got a great balance of people on the committee now. I think there's still scope from time to time to bring in advice and extra perspective on things like the consumer, because I think we will never have quite enough information about consumer, mindset and preferences and behaviour. But otherwise, we're at a good complement. So, in terms of the work in Wales, I've mentioned the Senedd already, so I won't do that again, other than knowing that the team in Wales have got that Senedd engagement plan leading up to and then after the elections. Something that's came up at WFAC last week and is gaining some momentum, I think, is the Welsh Government's Food Forum. So this is the Welsh Government sort of bringing together a lot of the parties that are playing a key role in our food system in Wales, and FSA have a very key place on that food forum. And what I've asked for is, in a couple of our themed meetings going forward, is that we hear a bit more about the work of that forum, because I think we can learn a lot. Maybe not dedicating a themed meeting to it, but tacking it in perhaps to other ones, to know what that forum know. Supporting the work of the Future Generations Commissioner. So I met the Commissioner again the other day with my Aber Innovation hat on, but it was a great opportunity to say hello again and to remind him of the FSA and yourself, Susan, and that interaction. And we will likely have a themed meeting in the near future on the work of the Future Generations Commissioner in the area of food, because now that report is quite well socialised, it's about actually what's going to flow from that, and the challenge to Welsh Government that the Commissioner has set. It's broad. How is the Food Forum most likely going to connect with it? Just knowing more about that will be really interesting. I think, so what we've started to do with WFAC is, instigated by Sian Bowsley, the Director for FSA in Wales, is to meet members of the team from the Welsh effort. So this time, coincident with a themed meeting, we met the consumer protection team from the Wales office and learned a lot about their work, their daily challenges, but also what they think about the bigger picture. And I've spoken to Julie again, sort of picking up on this, the amount of data that is out there in the world that informs us about things like incidents, for example, so the signals part of the work. It was really interesting to know more about that and understand areas where technology and different methods can help us be efficient and make improvements. So I really value those sessions with different parts of the team. So we're going to keep that going, most certainly. And yeah, I guess I'm getting a very strong sense, WFAC is getting a strong sense from Sian and the team that we're working across 3 nations wherever possible to avoid duplication, to create efficiency, is very, very high on the agenda, which is good to hear, of course, for this context. But also it'll have benefits for the Wales team. So in terms of our next themed meeting, we've got one in February. It's going to be around supplements. There's a gap in our knowledge, I suppose, as a committee about the work that's going on in supplements. After that, we've got a bit of a long list, probably like Anthony, and we'll try and stay as agile as we can to complement what NIFAC are looking to cover, as well as hot topics that arise periodically.
Great, Rhian, thank you for that. Really pleased to hear about the ongoing connections, tangential with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Commissioner. His last report did have some pretty far-reaching food recs, so I would be fascinated to hear how those are being taken forward. And then also very interesting to hear that you're planning a session on food supplements, and there may be several board members who might be interested in joining that. It's been a topic that lots of questions have come up about this. And if perhaps we could ask that any papers that are prepared for that are circulated in our regular board briefing to other people, that would be useful. And that will also be a prompt if people want to join the WFAC meeting. That may be an opening. I don't know if anybody wanted to add more on that, or any other questions for Rhian or comments on what's happening in Wales.
Actually, my only other comment was, it's just made me reflect a little bit of how much we do bring the customer in as a FSA almost, where you're talking about actually we need to understand the customer in Wales. Actually, maybe it's just a bit of self-reflection of how would we do that for ourselves.
So I don't know if Claire wants to comment on this, because I guess our routine, regular underpinning is the food and use survey, the consumer trackers and things, and Claire might want to comment on that. But there's always the possibility of doing bespoke work, but that tends to come out of particular needs, you know, whether that's PAL labelling or something else. But Claire, do you want to just say something about food and use?
So we do regular consumer research, so Food and U2 and the consumer tracker. The Food and U2 gives the opportunity for us to look at the trust scores that we talked about earlier, and then the consumer tracker gives us the opportunity to delve into particular topics at regular intervals, and we use that also within our communications to be able to track the effectiveness of different campaigns that we do.
Whilst we're talking about Wales, and Anjali, this is a question I think for you probably rather than for Rhian, but we've been expecting to receive the report of the review of the FSA in Wales, and could you just give us an update on what's happened to that, because it's been hanging around for a while?
So I understand something has hit the team's inbox just in the last day or so. So I haven't yet had sight, but I expect to be coming to yourself, Katie, and me very shortly.
Okay, so we'll come back to that in the next board, I imagine. Thank you. Okay, let's move over or back to Northern Ireland. Anthony.
Thank you, Susan. I covered what we did at the last think meeting, which was local authority, so I'll not go back through that again. Last week we met to discuss the papers for today, so I'll look forward into our next theme meeting, which is in February. We plan to look at the theme of science and surveillance. And given your announcement today about Ian, I think we'll try and wheel him in and get him engaged in that early. So we might as well get use of that connection now. That meeting is going to look specifically at the management of the Northern Ireland National Reference Laboratory contracts, given that technically we're still in the EU and we need to have that structure. We're going to have a look at surveillance and reporting of antimicrobial resistance to E. coli in retail meats, and the work of the team on the Four Nations Monitoring Group with regard to folic acid fortification. So we're going to try and bring in as much of the science bit of it as we can, and then see where we can go from there.
Thank you. Any comments to Anthony or anything about the work in Northern Ireland? In which case, thank you very much indeed. And that brings us to the end of our formal business for today. Unless there's any other business, which I forgot to ask about, but nothing doesn't look like anything's materialised whilst we've been meeting. Good. So I'm now going to turn to see if there's any questions from people who are with us in person today. We have referred a couple of times to the questions that came in writing, and we obviously will issue those in due course, and those get published as part of the formal minutes of the meeting. But if anybody here wants to ask any questions in person, can I ask you to introduce yourself and any organisation that you might be representing? Yes, please. If you just wait for a microphone and then we'll be able to hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sanipkil and Allergy Aware, we're a non-for-profit allergy organisation. It's just a lot of things been highlighted with regards to the burgeoning supplement sector and how the FSA and how labelling applies to that particular sector, because a lot of the products are imported and some of the labelling is unclear. It falls into another category of mislabelling and food crime, with one of the excipients only being halal or kosher. But there's also not a whole lot of transparency with regard to what it may contain, and they don't generally tend to have the PAL labels, I'm told.
Thank you very much for raising that, and you've managed to scoop up a number of sort of in one question. And supplements is a very complex area of our work, and you're right that we also have concerns about the labelling in a number of respects. I think what I'm going to do is, Rebecca, I wonder if you might just give a summary of what we do. And
yeah, absolutely, and thank you for that question. So just to emphasise that anything that's sold in the UK and GB has to meet the relevant standards. So we are aware it's not just supplements, but sometimes imported goods from other countries may not meet our standards. And we do a lot of work with border agencies and with through the NFCU and our general intelligence gathering. That's really important for us to understand those wider risks. With supplements, the responsibilities are a little bit more complicated because they're different in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and then obviously in Scotland they have their own independent regulation. But we work very closely with partners to make sure that supplements labelling is clear. In particular, as you say, sort of noting any safety labelling that needs to be applied, but also looking in with the part on any supplements are making on their label. So absolutely, it's an issue that we're aware of, and as Susan says, it covers a very complex range of different policy areas and responsibilities. But thank you for raising that.
So Rebecca, I think you made a good point about this being complex. I think the key point, which maybe didn't come through enough, is about taking action. So where these things come to our attention, and this is really the response. Local authorities are really the first point of call, is my understanding in this. But Katie.
Well, I was going to say from an enforcement point of view, so where the labelling is not meeting the legal requirements, then all the intelligence that we get on that is extremely helpful, because we can then feed it through to local authorities primarily for enforcement purposes. And occasionally, if the threshold for NFCU taking action is met without serious organised crime, they might well get involved. But I think the thing for us to do is to look at that issue as we think about our food standards priorities for the future, and that's something that we can definitely consider.
Thank you for raising it. Okay, and actually, when we're having mentioned that WFAC are going to do this thing on supplements, it might be worth just including a component in that, particularly on labelling and mislabelling. Good. So I think we are almost at the end, and I'm just going to now actually realise that I have one piece of any other business which I should have raised. I don't know, I'm obviously not on my best chairing today. I managed to mess up the time, and now I've managed to slightly mess up the agenda. Board members will be aware that we have been, well, in the NHS 10-year plan, the Department of Health and Social Care announced an intention to develop a system for healthy foods, food reporting and targets for the largest businesses. And this was with the aim of gathering data so that we could understand better what the healthiness of the products that they were putting into the market, with the aim that reporting would produce more transparency in the system, and that it would then enable, the data would enable a better understanding of what was going on and an ability potentially to set targets in the future. We have had some discussions with the Department of Health over that in recent months. And recently I had a formal letter from the Minister for Public Health, Ashley Dalton, asking if we might take on, more formally requesting that the FSA should support the development of that work. It's going to be quite a complex package of policy development and implementation. And what they're really looking for is FSA's input as they try to address the more detailed aspects of the policies, including things like business reporting protocols, the data collection, the assurance, enforcement, and so on. I think it is just exciting. We've been very supportive of this work. I think we need to be really conscious of the resource implications of this. I might ask Katie, I think, to comment first about really the feasibility of us doing this. I'm really keen, but I'm also conscious that I'm keen on a lot of things and we can't do everything. So I'll let Katie comment on that, but then I do want to open it up to the rest of the board because if we're going to do this, we'll need to get on with it pretty quickly. And so it would be good to hear your steer on this now before we go further. Katie.
Thank you, Susan. So the Department of Health have said that ministers have said they are minded to appoint us as the regulator, subject to the outcome of consultation. If we are the regulator for this new area of work, I think it is really important that we've helped to shape it from the start and make it workable. So if this responsibility is coming our way, we should do everything we can to get involved. The constraint from my perspective is resourcing one. For the remainder of this financial year, we don't have a lot of financial year left, and the fact that we are now gearing up to think about future food regulation, there is quite a bit of synergy in that. We have already been doing a little bit of work with the Department of Health, and Julie has been really heavily engaged in our work on the Food Data Transparency Partnership in the past, which is quite a natural progression into this. And I think we can continue to input into some of the development of that thinking and do so this year. But for resourcing work role, and if we actually to put serious resource into developing it, we are going to need it to come with money, and the usual approach to new areas of work is the department that creates a new policy then has to pay for it, and that is our expectation with the Department of Health. I think at the point at which we might be formally asked by ministers to take on the role, we would be saying we can do so if it's funded, and there'll be a limit to how much ramp-up work we can do without any extra resourcing. We'll do what we can, I think, this year if the board is content for us to do it, but it will be limited.
Okay, so I think the proposition is that we should, resources permitting, that we should support them in the development of this work. It will have to go out to public consultation, and I think my understanding is that the department, whilst they are currently minded to think that we would be the regulator, and that seems obvious, why would you set up another body when you've got a food regulator already? But I'm biased, so I can say that. But it would go out to consultation, so this is not a, this is by no means certain, but as Katie says, I think the logic in helping to shape it now is strong. Views from others, I guess particularly our new board members who have coming at this afresh. Frank.
I'll take the point about the resource, but it's a golden opportunity, isn't it, to get us into an area of healthy food, healthy eating, which would be a great shame to miss that opportunity. If we don't do it, who would do it, and presumably, who would do it well? I don't know. So I would encourage us to take it up. But I absolutely take the point about resources. It's a big issue. So if there's a substantive piece of work, we need to lobby with DH for resource, but also for the consequences that comes out of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Claire.
I agree with Frank. I think it's a great opportunity, but I think we would need additional resources to do it properly. And if we can link it to work we're already doing and also get some more funding for that, then it's something we should definitely be involved in, and particularly shaping it at this stage.
Yeah, I wonder if, I don't know if Beth or Rachel want to comment on those potential synergies with some of the other regulatory work. And this again may be something that the board's subgroup might want to pick up and see where we can get some efficiencies by thinking about these things in the round.
Thanks, Susan. I think the alignment is very much in terms of getting data from large businesses. It's the group of retailers that we'd be thinking about for this policy are the same ones that we've been talking to and we've worked with on the pilot for a national approach to regulation. So there are definitely opportunities to join it up. Also terms of thinking about kind of methods. This letter will allow us to engage much more openly with the industry on kind of on how to do this well and how to implement well. Thank you.
Steve? Oh no, Alison, sorry.
I think this is a golden opportunity, but it's also more on the agenda. Is it worth looking at timescales? Because it may be that the work required to take on this new project and resource it and deliver it could be deferred in terms of start date, because I'm very conscious that timescales for SPS are not within your control, and that has to take priority. And I'm always concerned about gender emission creep, much as it is to be desired as a golden apple to have in one's basket.
I think on this one, the timescales will be dictated by the Department of Health and the NHS tenure, and we'll be able to change them to sort of fit in with our resourcing. It is an additional thing in terms of bandwidth for the organisation, even if it comes with money, and that's something we're going to have to manage quite carefully. But I do think it is a tremendous opportunity to do some good as well, and it is in keeping with the strategy that we have, which says that we will be trying to help make food healthier and more sustainable.
Sorry, as a follow-up to that, can I ask, if you are going to take that on, what are you going to drop or do less of? Because you have a finite resource, even with improvements in productivity.
Let's just leave that hanging for a moment, and it's an absolutely valid point, so we'll come back to it. Steve?
No, I think that is a valid point, and I'd agree with it if the funding was limited to what I think the argument here is it fits in with our overall strategy. The timing is right in relation to some of the high-profile projects we want to be working on. There is a synergy there. So my view is, yes, we should do, just with the caveat that it's funded appropriately. If it's underfunded, it won't work. If it's appropriate, and it's a resource which we can utilise, help delivering better value with some of the projects.
Louise?
And I'd just add to all of the conversation really is that I think it depends on the scope. So I think all you can scope, we can then understand how does that fit in with the new regulation report or review, because actually for a lot of it crosses over with that in terms of the initial scoping, then actually it might be less of a burden immediately, because actually by the time you've done scoping, you might be part way through some of the SPS work.
Yeah, we have to see what it is and what time is set. I was also going to say, if we are being the new statutory functions, which I suspect is what this would result in, ultimately that's a decision for business and for Parliament. And it's obviously helpful if we're all very pro it and trying to make it work. But that's where the decision will be made. And so I think if that's going to happen, it's very important that we go into it eyes open and have secured all the things that we need to do it.
I think it's great to hear the general positivity about the opportunity and the potential to do good in the system when we set the strategy that food should be healthier and more sustainable. This fits right within that, and it's a real opportunity to drive it forward. However, everybody is concerned about resources and about priorities. Given that there's a lot of uncertainties in this, I think what I would like to suggest is that we give a green light essentially for the rest of this financial year, taking us up to the next board meeting, to continue to work with DHSE to really scope this out thoroughly. And that I don't know when they're planning to consult on this, but I think at the next board, we really do need a paper on this, which sets out what we've done and really makes a proposition to us for the next steps. Because I think at the moment there's too much uncertainty for us to just say, oh yes, let's crack on with this. I think we need to understand what we're committing to, what the resources are, how it fits with our other work. And I think that is the moment at which we should be saying, where does this sit within our priority list? I accept that means we're giving an extra task for the next few months, but my feeling is that it's worth it, and I don't know, we'll have to find some people hiding behind the filing cabinet, and we'll talk separately about how we make this happen. But does that seem a reasonable plan, that we do a sort of kind of scoping and support piece now, and then really have a proper paper to think about what the implications of this going forward? Because unless there's the opportunity for us to do it well, then we may not want to get into this. I think the point that Rachel made about this opening up the possibility for us to have more conversations with business is also helpful, because the better we understand their views on it will help us to understand the feasibility of this whole thing. Good. Oh well, there we go. There's a bit of new news to finish the day, and a good job we saved a bit of time earlier. So it's all worked out in the end, and that brings us to the end of this December board meeting. Thank you all very, very much indeed for your input, your engagement, your ideas. It's all really valuable, and we will take this forward and obviously keep the board updated as we've indicated along the way. So safe travels home, and absolutely my opportunity to say a very, very happy Christmas to everybody. I've got the Christmas tree in my line of sight here, so I hope that you will all move into the sort of Christmas period and have a break and enjoy some time with family and friends. Thank you all very much indeed for everything you've contributed over this year. Goodbye for now.